Hello, everyone, and welcome back once again to another edition of the Tetracast. This is RPG Site's weekly podcast where we get the site staff together to talk about our favorite genre of video games. I'm your host. My name is Brian Vitale. Joining me today, I have Josh Torres,
Anime,
Adam Vitale,
Hello.
Chowman Wu,
Expo.
and joining us once again for the first time in about a year and a half or 2 years, we have a special guest. We have joining us George Yang.
2023 Anime Expo 2023.
there you go, the Holy Trinity.
We
Yeah,
did
so-
The Asians, had to step up.
it.
Yeah, so no James, because James is over at doing something, I assume, relevant to us at Anime Expo, playing a Grand Blue Fantasy Relink demo or something. But yeah, so we have...
He's trying to confirm it's real for us. He's like,
Is
I
it-
see it with my own eyes.
Is it actually
Actually,
playable, or is it just like a demo? Like
think it's
it's a
playable,
video. It's a video
maybe?
file that you just.
Oh yeah. They just booted up and like whatever you're controlling, it's actually like a Dragon's Lair, like a movie playing in front of you.
Yeah. So we had George join us about a couple years ago when we were discussing the release of Tales of Arise, whenever that was. I'm sure it was longer ago than I remember. George is a... Correct me if I'm wrong, George. I'm going to try to introduce you. You're a freelance writer who has bylines pretty much all over the place at Polygon, at IGN, at CNN, at Crunchyroll, and Kotaku, and of course, our RPG site. So
Yes.
He's a world warrior.
Yeah.
So we are glad we can make the illustrious list. So thank you for joining.
Yes. Of course.
So we are recording this on the first day of July. Looking at our itinerary for today, of course, we have Anime Expo going on, and there are, as always, some gaming related presences there. I know Bandai's there, Sega's there, a few other people are there that maybe Adam knows for sure, and I know that James is always setting up some demos and is going to report back next week on that. But compared to the last few weeks of Summer Games Fest, of Nintendo Direct, a few weeks before that, we had the PlayStation Showcase, we had the Xbox Showcase, with everyone else. On the news front, and as we go into July, it's kind of actually going to be a little bit of a quiet month, relatively speaking. Of course, I think we're all okay with that, because then you look into August and September, and I don't think my family's going to hear from me because there's just too many games releasing. So we are going to open up with a few recent releases, or actually upcoming releases in one case, going into July that are kind of the headliners for the month.
Before we
Opening
do
up-
that, I just wanted to mention that like this weekend being Anime Expo, literally as we're recording this or shortly after, there's like Bandai Namco has a panel, there's a Type Moon panel, there's a Grand Blue's got something,
There's
like
going to be a lot like that. That'll probably
Idea
come out.
Factory. So by the time you're listening to this, there might be announcements from Anime Expo that we haven't covered yet. So we'll get to those next week.
But we are recording from the past, so we don't know.
Yep.
We're speaking to the microphone. So going into July, of course, probably the biggest game, the headliner on our radar for our site's purview, is the most recent English entry in the Trails series, Kaseki series, and that is Trails Into Reverie. Now, one of the reasons we brought George Yang on the podcast today is because George reviewed this game for, correct me if I'm wrong, you reviewed this for IGN?
Yes, correct.
And I am currently in the process of reviewing it for RPG Site. At the time I speak now, I haven't written the review yet. I'm about 80% of the way through the game. So the embargo just raised a couple days ago, so we're free to talk about it. The release is it the 7th, the 6th? It's in about a week. It's one of the, nowadays it feels like for Final Fantasy 16 or for most games, the embargo, if you're lucky, is a day or two before release. So actually a week before release is pretty rare. So this is the rare case where we can speak openly about a game, even though it's not quite released yet. So since you are our guest, George, I'll just kind of let you kind of take the reins here, at least starting out. So Trails into Reverie, of course, this is a pretty deep entry into a very long running series, and that's going to kind of color our conversation around this game and how we talk about it, how we review it, etc. What, like, going into this game, I'm going to make some assumptions. I assume you've played most of the other entries in the Trail series, but I just don't know. Like, when you go into this game, what is your history, your expectation?
Yeah, so I actually started with Cold Steel back in like 2015 when it was localized. I Yeah, so Cold Steel was the first one I started with, and then I played those, went back to Trails in the Sky, and then played Zero and Azure when they came out recently. Yeah, I played those, and then now I played Reverie.
So you
Basically,
played them all beforehand,
yeah,
no missing spots.
nope.
Right. I feel like
I
that's a pretty that's probably a pretty typical like
yeah,
avenue that people have gone if they
right.
played the first console release for
Hmm.
Cold Steel and then kind of went backwards.
Yep.
So
Hmm. Yep. And yeah, so I played all those and then jumped into Reverie.
now, can I ask a question? As probably the only person in this podcast who's behind on this series,
How dare you?
as I understand it, Reverie is basically it's almost like a conclusion not only to the Cold Steel series but to the Crossbell duo as well.
Yes.
So the way I understand it is like someone like me who has to catch up definitely play the Crossbell games first.
Yes.
Yeah, so I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. So clearly, this series, as it has released in English, has been a long kind of twisty-turvy road. And where can you start? Is this a good entry to start with? Has been a kind of a repeated answer. And depending on the context, depending on the player, it's had kind of a few major answers. Like obviously, you can start at the beginning. Trails in the Sky, Trails of Cold Steel is a decent starting point. Trails from Zero is a decent starting point because those are kind of like the sub arcs or whatever you want to call them. And I'm the sort of person where like if you want to start a story mid route, you go into it knowing that if you want to start at Cold Steel 3, you can. However, if there is a game in this long series that is the least appropriate to start with, unfortunately, it is probably Trails into Reverie.
I don't know what you're talking about. The Japanese title is Hajimari no Kiseki, and if you
Oh,
translate that, it's like Trails into the Beginning or Trails at the Beginning. So
uh,
it's right there in the title.
So Adam has it right. This is basically the kind of concluding entry slash, I assume, bridge entry into the Kuro games, which of course I don't have experience with. Most of us here in the Western, hemisphere don't. But because the English releases were kind of in an order that they were, obviously the two most recent English releases are the two Crossbell games. When you go into Reverie, the very first arc in Reverie takes place in Crossbell with that cast. So it actually, in a way, kind of feels really natural to go from Trails to Azure into Trails into Reverie, or sorry, Trails to Azure into Trails into Reverie. The order that I played these, just to bounce off George, is that I skipped the Crossbell games because they weren't localized, right? I played Cold Steel 3, and that's when they really start to meld together. I'm like, all right, I'm missing information here. I really got to play the Crossbell game. So I played it with the Geofront translation before going into Cold Steel 4. Of course, soon after the Geofront translation of Azure came out, that's when the formal official localization was announced. So I actually have not played the official localizations, only the fan translation one, but because it was based off the same work from Geofront, I'm kind of saying that was, suitable or acceptable. So, but it sounds like everyone here except for Adam has all the necessary components to play through Reverie. So I guess to tee George up again, George, where does we'll start at a high level and then we'll kind of drill in. So this is a long running series that people have different marks for which one's their favorite or least favorite. When you reviewed Reverie, like did it rank high on your list of entries in the game, low, in the middle? Like what's been your favorite entry so far, and where does Reverie rank?
So my personal favorite out of all the games I've played, I really enjoyed Cold Steel 3, as well as Trails to Azure, and also Trails in the Sky third chapter. I would say Reverie is among the top. So Cold Steel 3, Azure, Sky third chapter, and Reverie would be probably my favorites among the Trails games. And then I would say that like technically you could start at Cold Steel 3. I can understand why you would say that, because that's when, as you said, that's when kind of all of the other sub-series kind of converge. But then if you don't play Cold Steel 1 and 2, then you don't really have the context behind, Reen when he's the instructor in Cold Steel 3, right?
Mhm.
You can skip the Sky series because they don't really have too much of an impact on Reverie, but characters like Estelle and Josh are in Reverie. So it's worth it if you have time. But if you really want to get caught up quickly, then you can skip those. And while I would recommend playing Cold Steel 1 and 2, technically you can start with 3 and then go into 4, Cold Steel 4, and then the Crossbow Duology, and then go into Reverie.
Uh,
I would say that like also Cold Steel 4 isn't great. It's good. I think it's good, but it's not great. I agreed with James on his. I think he reviewed Cold Steel 4.
Yeah.
I'm kind of sad that James isn't here to talk about this, but oh well, we'll be back in next week.
I think none of us here.
I mean, we talked about Cold Steel 4 to death on this podcast to the point that probably listeners are sick of it, of us complaining about Cold
Yeah,
Steel
we
4.
always complain about everything we talk about.
So George, James did not think highly of Cold Steel 4. I also played Cold Steel 4 was the most recent game that I played before Reverie, and I do think that Reverie does fix some of the issues that Cold Steel 4 had. Not all of them. I still think that Reverie's cast is way too big. And you might say, like, well, what's the problem with the big cast? Who cares? I think it makes just the game less interesting to play through sometimes. But let's talk about positives first. Cold Steel 4, of course, being the fourth entry of that sub-series, has a lot of escalation. The stakes are so damn high and almost to like a ludicrous extent where I almost don't feel like tethered to the story anymore. Reverie, despite being attached to those events, and we're gonna have to speak about the story a little bit generically, just unfortunately that's like the nature of the beast. The stakes are a little bit lower, and that actually makes me kind of adhere to it a little bit more. I feel like I actually can like empathize with like the characters and their motivations at this point, because you're not talking about like millennia old, curses and legends and characters themselves that are hundreds of years old. For the most part, it's happening in the now. The antagonists are a little bit more well defined. For the most part, I have a few more comments there, and it feels more like an extension or an epilogue rather than another tier of escalation, which is where Cold Steel 4 I think kind of lost me a little bit.
Yeah. I think in contrast to Cold Steel 4, Reverie is a lot more focused. In its plot and its characters, which I really, really appreciated, especially with the Reen. Reen in Cold Steel 4, he was just kind of all over the place. But I think Reverie redeems him as a character by giving him a much more like streamlined and focused route, as opposed to how he was portrayed in Cold Steel 4. So I really like that part.
So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Reen, but they do. Hajimari or Reverie does one thing that I thought was a little bit strange, is that Reen, of course, by the time of the events of Cold Steel 4, he is a very well-known character who has a lot of notches on his belt. But in some ways, he's still treated like this up-and-coming plucky whelp in a bit, which I kind of appreciate it to some extent because it minimizes the Gary Stu aspect, but there's also sometimes like, come on, do you know who I am? A little bit. I personally like Lloyd a little bit more, even though those two characters are quite similar in terms of their personality and how other people behave around them. But I do think I just like Lloyd a little bit more. And in terms of focused games, you went over some of your favorite games in the series. Mine, I think, is actually Trails from Zero, which is like the opposite of Cold Steel 4 or Hajimari in terms of like scale and escalation, where it's like you get these four characters and the story is based on them. And I just really love that level of focus. So unfortunately, Reverie doesn't have that exactly, but because it kind of splits it, and we'll talk about one of the main aspects of this game is the eloquently translated Trails to Walk system. I don't know what it was called in Japanese, but in English it's called Trails to Walk. This is the way that the story is divided amongst three characters, and there are three different groups. So there is Lloyd and his group, primarily based on the Crossbell characters, Reen and his group, primarily based on the Ereboni and Cold Steel characters, and then this enigmatic masked C and their group. And of course, that's one of the big hooks of the marketing of this game is who is C? Who are these people? And because of that, even though Reverie still has, in my opinion, quite an unwieldy cast, it deploys it a little bit more efficiently, where you're not dealing with all 41 characters at once. You're dealing with a fraction of them, with the exception of a certain other gameplay mechanic. But how did you think about the route system? Because obviously that's unique to this game so far in the series.
Yeah, the route series I think was pretty well used. It was a great way to divide up the characters evenly. Yeah, and I think every character got their time in the limelight, especially like Class 7 with Reen. Like a lot of the character, like a lot of Class 7 was pretty evenly split between Reen and Lloyd, and then also I can't remember if any of the Class 7 joined C or not, but I think Class 7 being such a large group, each individual member was dispersed well between the three routes, and I think because of that structure, I think the pacing was also really great because you're forced to switch perspectives, right? And so that keeps I think the narrative, fresh and exciting, and you don't have to play as like one single character the entire time. So I really appreciated the kind of approach that Reverie took with the three routes.
And my only drawback of that, or the route system, well, not really a drawback, but so the route system, the Trails to Walk system, allows you to switch past a point in the story early on. It allows you to switch perspective kind of whenever you want. But of course, if you play to a certain point far enough, it kind of forces it. And because there will be times where they kind of overlap and the narrative needs both parties essentially to be in the same place narratively speaking, so that you can like toggle back and forth between them, and then you'll see some encounters from multiple perspectives. It works kind of like the way you'd expect. But I kind of found that I was like, all right, I'm at a new chapter. I'm just gonna play Lloyd's route until it forces me to shift. Then I'm gonna play Reen's route until it forces me to shift, and then I'm gonna play C's route until it forces me to shift. And I just didn't find myself switching manually that often because there's really not a lot of incentive to, but I still just appreciated the change in perspective in general, even if it was just like tailored for me, even if I never had a choice in how to switch. I still think that the multiple perspectives is a smart way to deal with such a big cast.
Yeah, I did it pretty much the same thing as you. I played until I was forced to switch paths.
So
As for this,
I actually appreciate the little bit less story focused, more gameplay focused. I think that generally speaking, the Trails combat system is pretty good. One issue that the series sometimes falls into, though, is where like some character abilities are just like almost like ridiculously overpowered, like relative to others. And there's so many characters, so I imagine it's sometimes hard to balance, the gameplay, the characters, the combat, and whatnot. But one thing I really like about Trails Third is that game I think has like 20 characters, which felt like a lot at the time.
I'm pretty sure it's 15. I remember at the time thinking like, damn, 15 characters, and a few of them are kind of like cameos. Like you get Muller for the first time and Richard and Josette, yeah.
Yeah.
And then
one thing I like about Third is I felt like the game was really well balanced. Like every character is useful except Josette. Even she's sort of useful. But like I felt like that game was just like, one of the things I liked about it was, mix and matching the party and all the different skills and abilities and kind of forming my own team and group. And then later on in that game, you split the party up, and I thought some of those like just mechanical things were cool. You mentioned before that Reverie has a ton of characters. I was reading reviews, and a lot of reviews mentioned that like the combat in this game is maybe the most polished in the series to this point. So I guess my broad question is how do you feel about like just the gameplay elements of it?
So basically, Cold Steel 3's combat was very, I think, overpowered. Because that's when they first introduced orders, and then I think when they went to Cold Cold Steel 4, Falcom was like, okay, we need to scale back on how powerful the orders are, and then so they did that. And then with Reverie, I think they struck a bit of a balance between the two. Except they introduced the United Fronts mechanic, and I feel like that kind of makes it a little more overpowered.
It is overpowered. That's
for people who don't know, what is this mechanic?
So basically, United Fronts is basically a beefed up version of the whole burst all out attack thing. The all out attack is when it's kind of like Persona, right? When your 4 characters rush in to do some extra damage to the enemy. With United Fronts, it's basically the same thing, except it's all the characters. It's the 4 on the battlefield as well as the 1 in your reserve party. And with United Fronts, you actually have the option to specify whether you want to do a United Front on attack, a United Front on magic attacks, or like a United Front support attack, which is like healing your entire party and stuff. And United Fronts uses a different meter than the BP system that that the orders and the rush attacks use. They use a charge gauge, which is what you typically use to get an advantage on enemies on the field. Like you break the little boxes and then they pop out little glowy balls and you collect them and charges your meter. So actually the United Fronts gives like a extra incentive to hit those boxes out in the field, which is really nice. But so the United Fronts, I feel like it's really overpowered compared to relatively everything else. But other than that, that's like really the biggest change I think Reverie has. And in terms of overpowered characters, I think Reen is by far the most overpowered character, like gameplay wise. He's just too good.
There's never a game that he's not overpowered. Yeah. As a guy that writes guide over, it's like this is your most OP character. Just forget about it.
Yeah, Chow's guide strategies. It's like just use Reen or Josh or whoever and use their strongest attack.
Well, the thing is ever since the PSP games, like a lot of the same strategies still work. You can still do like the one accessory that gives you extra CP gain, the one accessory that gives you auto CP gain. Then you can spam S crafts. You can give yourself an orbment that is like the first craft that you do per battle is double damage, and then you can have like a master quartz that is every time you defeat enemy you get more CP back. Then you add this United Front, which basically hits all enemies on the field also. It's easy, at least on the normal or hard difficulty. I'm sure if you played this on Nightmare first run, you'd actually have to be a little bit more discerning.
Mindful.
But like my basic strategy is I go into a battle, I use Reen has a very basic order that's just costs 1 BP for plus 25% damage, so just might as well do that. You almost always have 1 BP. Then if you have an assault gauge, which you can have an orbment that has it autofill up when you walk, you can do a union attack. What's it called? I forget what it's called. United Assault. And then that gives you even more CP and a strength boost and hits all the enemies. Then you do an S-craft, and then by then chances are the battle's done. And you just repeat that over and over. So I'll put it.
I have one question for you guys. Do you guys ever use the break exploit back in Cold Steel 3? The one where you break the enemy, use the thing to accelerate your turn, then break the enemy again.
I remember it was in Cold Steel Sarah's 3. I don't remember. Yes, I was just about to mention. I used Sarah's order a bunch. It was like really very.
They nerfed it in 4 where her order is like it only lasts 1 turn. So you can still, like, if you time it up perfectly, it's still powerful, but it's not obscene. And I will say, so on a harder difficulty, I'm sure you can utilize a lot of these mechanics a little bit more interestingly. But because you have these assault orders that hit basically everything on the field, and then of course the S-crafts that hit basically everything on the field, and you have access to high tier magic right away, which hits basically everything on the field. Like positioning is far less important than it has been in other games, just because you're starting at like level 100 because these characters are like, veterans that have seen all the shit up and down. So I do think that in a way the combat has gotten a little bit less interesting just due to the escalation.
To me, like Hajimari's combat doesn't really get interesting until like post-game bosses.
Right.
Yeah, because those are more designed in a more interesting manner to counter a lot of
Okay,
popular strategies.
I'll reveal a secret. I have not fully beaten this game. I keep getting sidetracked, but I did play a bit of it. I think all the combat's main focus is in the Reverie corridor. Was it?
Yeah.
So
That's where it gets interesting combat wise for me.
So for the Reverie Corridor, so this is a mechanic of the game where partway through the story, the different characters are teleported to this strange location that looks it's basically I don't know, how do I describe this? In game it's described like literally as being similar-ish to Phantasma, which is the location of Trails 3. And then
Yeah,
the
especially
Reverie
like think
Corridor is
about it.
also go ahead.
Yeah.
Did they actually bring up Phantasma?
Yeah,
The
they
people
did.
who were there.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it's think about it like for people who play Trails in the Third, like Trails the Third, like it's sort of like that hub section that you explore around to it functions in a similar manner to that. Like that.
So
What was it called? The Tower of the Phantasma thing.
I think it's just called Phantasma. But yeah, it's
Okay.
same sort of thing. But then the Reverie Corridor was like a post-game dungeon in Cold Steel 2, 1 of those ones. But this is kind of different because it's semi-procedurally generated. It has like so how this works is you have a hub area and eventually you have the entire cast is available at this point. And how the game kind of narratively works for that is that when the cast goes into the Reverie Corridor, they have like this is a bit strange, but it's how it works. They have like short-term memory loss. They're like, "Why am I here? I don't know. I guess we better fight shit." And then when they go back to where they were in the story, they're like, "Where was I? I don't remember. Oh well." And I'm sure like near the end of the game, I haven't quite gotten there yet. I think I have one more chapter 4 to go through, and then I have like a final chapter. So I've seen like 80% of the story. So I'm assuming it'll like loop back in before it's all said and done. But that's how they kind of describe this like little arcadey mode that you can opt into at any point. You pull up the Trails to Walk menu, but instead of picking any individual route, you pick the Reverie Corridor, which is where you can just kind of grind and do all the stuff. So that's when you go into the place, and because it pools all the characters, you go into the menu, and I literally said like, all right, let me see how many characters I have, and I counted left to right, and I haven't unlocked them all yet, and I had 41. I'm like, all right, I've got 41 characters. You
Only
can pick,
41? Yeah, okay.
you can pick, and I hadn't unlocked a few, like I've unlocked a few since then. And
like George will understand, but the final playable roster of this game is like obscene. It's like too much for an RPG.
Well, once you add the gotcha character,
yeah,
I have a
we talk
couple
about the
of
gotcha yet.
yeah, there is gotcha. So the one thing about the multiple characters, first of all, at that point, you kind of don't have a lot of different play styles. Like a lot of the characters occupy kind of the same role, and it's pretty much just their roles are almost completely set by whichever master course they have. So you can kind of like trade those around or whatever. So you can kind of not 100%, but you can almost have anyone fill any role. But one thing that the game does that I can understand why they do it, but it kind of takes away some of the gameplay is because there are 41 characters to like gear up. What the Reverie Corridor does is that you can find and or buy and or upgrade specific armor and boots. So there's 2 armor slots. There's your armor and then there's your boots. Then you got your accessories. You will unlock not only armors and boots, but weapons that will specifically say these boots are for Usis only. These boots are for Reen only. This shirt is for Tio only. This weapon is for Juna only. And so you have a whole slate of weapons where you just buy them and equip them on the one character that they can use. And it kind of takes a lot of the decision making away from you if you just want to like gear up a single character. Like, all right, I want to use Kurt. Let me just go to the store and buy his weapon because he's got one bespokely assigned to him. Oh, I want to use Fee. I want to use a boot specifically assigned to her. And I'm like, I guess that's one way to make it so that gearing up 40 characters isn't so daunting. But it also means that you just kind of like go with what the game tells you for the most part.
I don't know if this has changed with the localized English version, or if there's any quality of life patches down the line for Reverie. But like when I played it like around launch time in Japan, like it was straight up one of the worst menuing in a JRPG I've ever done, because every time that you swap to a new party, it would obviously take out all their equipment. You have to like re-equip them pretty much and make it basically the way you wanted to, and you have to do this almost like ad infinitum, when you're going through the game, because you're constantly switching up parties and you have to re-equip them the way that you like to, get them geared up for the next challenge and
I don't
and
think
so
you have to
forth.
do that here.
I
So I
have a silly answer to this. You know what my answer
Okay.
is? So because there are so many characters that are dropping in and out of your party, past the point, I didn't bother to equip accessories unless I was struggling with a boss fight, because I just didn't want to like go into the menu and say, "Oh, Risha joined me. Better make sure she has some accessories. Oh, whoever joined me, better make
Yeah,
sure
but
she has stuff."
but that becomes important in like higher difficulties when you're playing at higher difficulties, right? So
Yeah.
like when you're playing this game and you have to pay mind to like difficulty stuff, when actually like itemizing or equipping your characters with like proper equipment to make their builds work. Like if that when that's important, when you have to factor that in, it is one of the most like frustrating RPGs to play when it comes to menuing.
I
Because
don't think that the accessories were unequipping once I did equip them. So that might have been patched out, because I would equip like obviously like Lloyd and Rain with good accessories, and I never had to like when the party switched reset them. So I
okay,
think
I wonder if they actually like patched that out
that sounds
or
terrible.
made it. It was god awful. Like
Yeah, I
I,
never.
I like the game, but like it's like in my first impression was like this is the worst menuing, one of the worst menuing experiences I've ever done in an RPG. It's just
Yeah, I never had to switch any accessories or anything like that. So
okay, interesting. So that's cool if they actually like improved upon that. That was a major flaw when I first played it.
And some of the menuing is just a consequence of having 40 plus characters. Like you go into the shop that I was talking about, and because every character has their own set of boots, you just scroll down and like you're reading the tooltip to find where are Laura's boots. Here they are. And so, or if you go into the party menu and you're trying to switch out, you like the 4 characters on the far left are the ones in your active party, right? And if you want to switch them out, you just got to scroll past all the artwork all the way to the right, 30, 40 times. Oh, there's the person I want to swap in. So some of it is just a consequence of you have so many characters, you're going to have lists that are 40 entries long. That's how it is. But going to the positives, I'll see what George thinks about this. So the Reverie corridor, how it works is it has different like tiers, different floors that are unlocked as you go through the story, and the floors are semi-random. You'll go through and it's almost dungeon crawler-esque, where the map will reveal itself as you traverse it. You'll fight a set of monsters. Some of these monsters are like identified as being mini bosses, and they'll drop these things called, I forget if they're called spheres or orbs in the game, but
they're called stones, I think.
Stones. They're basically the spherical colored objects that you'll want to gather and bring back to the hub. And you'll go through, and once you clear a floor, you go back to your hub, and you can there is an option at the center of the hub to basically regenerate the map. So you choose when the map's regenerated, then you can go in again, and there'll be a different layout. You can re-grab the chests and get more spheres. So some of these spheres or orbs or stones are fixed, where they'll give you you talked about the gotcha characters, so you'll unlock characters that otherwise weren't introduced to the story. Basically the story will kind of hand wave like, oh, so and so, like for instance, minor character here, Toval, the bracer from Cold Steel 2. Now he's in the corridor. You can use him now, and things like that. You can also get like these generic silver orbs that basically give you new orbments, new equipment, new costume pieces, things like that, where you'll have very, very typical, where you can have a single one, or you can do them in batches of 10. They're ranked from like rare to super rare to ultra rare. So it looks very much like a gotcha currency.
I guess to really clarify this, like there's no like microtransactions to like buy this currency to roll the gotcha more. Yeah, you just obtain it in game. So
yeah, so it's like Xeno 2 in terms of blades. Kind of. Were you saying something, Chow?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's like I wish this was like real life, I wish I could re-roll by saving my game before I do my rolls.
Yeah, you could save your game and just do that. So.
Yeah, you can do that.
So what are your thoughts on the Reverie corridor, just in general?
I think it's fine. I think when it's first there, like when you're first introduced to it, it feels kind of out of place compared to the rest of the game. But once you get into the post game and you clear all of the other floors in the Reverie corridor, it actually gives you like a more story context into why it's there. So I think in that sense, it fits better once you know why it's there, and you know, I'm happy that it actually has a post game.
Yeah, me too. I was like, for me, that's when the game like shines as post game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because like it has like the most interesting gameplay scenarios there. I think actually I wonder with the release of this in English, do they do they already have like the story DLC like in the launch version of this game, or is that coming later? Because like there's like a story centric DLC that's like a visual novel that that's kind of a direct link to like the next arc in the Trail series. I was wondering if they had it there at day one for this game, or is that coming later?
I haven't seen it, but I also haven't gotten credits
I
yet.
think it's I think it's in the game. I'm trying not to spoil anything.
Yeah.
But-
Basically, it's like a Reen-centric focused like scenario. It's kind of like a VN. Something happens, but I'm not sure. It's like a small thing.
Huh.
So well, people will figure it out when the game launches.
Hey, the game
Okay.
is long, and I haven't got to the end yet. But yeah, so it does remind me of, I really like Trails the Third, Trails in the Sky the Third, and it does give me a little bit of that Phantasma feel, which I do kind of like the dungeon crawly buildcraft aspect to it. And the other thing that I didn't talk about is that you have these so in the other games you have these, I believe they're either class points or AP points. I forget exactly the acronym for when you're taking on your like field studies and undertaking the bracer quest or whatever, depending on the game. You get ranked and then graded at the end of every chapter, and then it tiers up and you get rewards for being a completionist and following Chow's guides, etc. And this game, there is a little bit of that in the story, but a lot of it is tied to the Reverie corridor. We'll have, they call them master missions and then mini missions. And these missions can range anywhere from like complete half the bestiary, complete the fishing log, cook 15 unique dishes, clear the first floor of the corridor. And then you'll have mini missions, which are basically like have Yuna do a union assault or have a Fee do a start a burst combo or things like that. And these will give you this game's version of those points, which are now RP Reverie points, and you'll tier them up that way. So it's kind of like the same system, but slightly repackaged to interface with the corridor. And then you also get this new currency to spend on upgrades where it like extends the reach of your burst meter from starting, I believe, at 5 and up to 8. The amount of assault gauge pips you have starting at 2 up to 4 or 5. So it has like a little bit of like resource progression, which is kind of fun to like, if you're like sort of person that likes grinding, or even just like progressing, you can dive into the Reverie corridor. You have obviously a million party members to choose from if you want to change up who you're playing with. And then there's like the other games have the trial chests, so chests that you had to bring certain characters to fight a kind of like a micro boss in order to open. That's now incorporated into the Reverie corridor as a trial door. A lot of the mini games like Vantage Master and the puzzle game from the Crossbell games, Pom Pom or whatever, is now in there as well. So the Reverie corridor is kind of just like a fun little playground to just kind of mess around with, either in the combat or like the mini games. And there's usually like one thing that's kind of fun is that it gives you incentive to do like a lot of the mini games I've never touched before. Like there's a mini game where you go to a beach and you have to like do some Paper Mario-esque like button input mini games to like cut open a watermelon with the different characters. And I actually spent time doing that because every time
That
you do
reminds me, like there when this game came out on PlayStation 4, there was a PlayStation VR component to it. Did you guys try out like any of those out? Like because I know there's like a VR component to this game.
I think that's not in the review version.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not in
All
the
right.
review version, and I don't have a VR headset on my PC.
How about you, George? Do you have a VR?
I do have a VR, but I didn't know there was this.
Okay, so yeah, maybe like it'll come later. It's very fan service focused.
Yeah,
Let's say.
so
a VR component.
one of the mini games, you go to the beach, and at the beach you can do three things. You can do this like jet ski sort of mini game. You can do this watermelon slicing, or you can just do like the sit and chat with a female character and you're in first person, and you can do that in VR. So you can still do it without VR. It's just mouse look with your mouse and keyboard, because I'm playing it on PC. And of course, I couldn't try the VR option, but it's there.
You're not really immersed then.
Yeah, it didn't fool me.
Okay, all right. I think I really want to know your perspectives on both the Brian and George in terms of like having these three separate narratives, right? They're not all made equally. There are definitely pros and cons to each. I was really surprised when I was first playing this game because I really liked the Crossbell crew, but for me, like their side of the story was sort of the weakest for me narratively compared to Reen and C's routes. So I'm interested to see where you guys are landing on that so far.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. C's was the best. I love the chemistry between C.
That reminded me of that, like C's route reminded me of like Trails to Zero type of like squad building.
Yeah, and then I also agree with you that Lloyd's route was definitely the weakest. Because it was just kind of it felt like a retread of the whole Crossbell independence thing, and like we went through 2 games of that, right? And for them to just basically do the whole thing again, I would have much preferred if the storyline focused on like the independence, the city achieved independence, and then now maybe Lloyd has to and his party has to kind of deal maybe with like consequences or ramifications of the independence, which
because like achieving independence doesn't mean like it's like a happy ever after, and like obviously there will be consequences to that.
Compelling than just fighting for independence again.
Right. So let me tee this up a little bit. So at a very high level, because obviously anyone who is playing this game hopefully has played at least a few other entries and they kind of know what they're getting into. After the events of the Crossbell duology in Cold Steel 4, at the start of this game, Crossbell is finally just about to be free, be independent, and it doesn't happen for reasons. And this game quite has a slow ramp in terms of the narrative like escalation, which I already kind of talked about. There's this new faction called the Ebon Defense Force. They're basically just soldiers who are following some antagonist that want the war to continue. They're basically just being stubborn. And that's the antagonist for most of the first like 3 chapters. You're not quite sure who is pulling the strings and why. The player is kind of left in the dark. And so C's group obviously introduces some new characters, and it has a little bit of that perspective that is different from what we're used to. Reen's group kind of has a lot more of interfacing with the society because of course they're in play, revealing who the antagonists are, kind of progressing the narrative, while Lloyd's is kind of like, well, this evil faction, they're building these robots or these soldats from somewhere. Let's figure out like where they're building them. And it's just a little bit like limited scope. It doesn't quite, it feels like a little bit like a C story. It's like the C plot of a sitcom or whatever, which is unfortunate because that's probably like my favorite cast is the the Crossbell cast, but they're kind of given like the least important things to do, at least so far where I'm at. I will say that early on, I kind of wish like there are far fewer antagonists in play during the story, and the game kind of fleshes out that by having you fight a lot of large monsters, or I'll just say like imposters. So I kind of spent the first like 1 or 2 chapters of this game wishing I had kind of a real antagonist, because you're kind of left like, who are we fighting? I don't know. Who's pulling the strings? And eventually in chapter 3 and 4 you get some of that, but it's a slow ramp. You spend a lot of time fighting these Ebon Defense Force just mooks for a good while and wondering like, who are they following? And you don't really know.
So like so obviously you have a lot of returning characters, and we've been talking about like there are some new ones like on top of like this already like crazy amount of cast members, but C's route, like just basically like initial impressions. Obviously no spoilers. Like what do you think about C himself, and then these new characters, Swin, Nadia, and Lapis. Like that's kind of the core group you're given. Like for me, like I can't. It's hard for me to separate what I think about this group because Swin and Nadia, do return in the future arc of Trails. So I kind of have a more deeper understanding of where they eventually go with this story. But just what do you guys think of them?
I guess I'll take this first. First of all, I did Sven and Nadia are, I guess they're like introduced in Cold Steel 4 in one of the in-game books. So I went back and kind of reread that.
3 and 9.
Yep, 3 and 9. You got anything else?
No, Charles is like just 3 and yeah.
Oh yeah, but that's the name of the in-game book. It's 3 and 9. They, I guess it's hard to judge. They kind of feel right now like extras. But knowing that they'll make, like, I'm not surprised that they have a presence in the future, because who doesn't in this series? So they have an interesting chemistry. I will say that Nadia has a very, very similar vibe to Ren, and the game like explicitly winks and says, "Yep, aren't these two similar?" So I almost kind of like when the character kind of feels like it has been done already, I'm a little bit less attached. Lapis, I was a little bit surprised. Lapis is the small character with the monochromatic eyes, or what is it? Heterochromia. So she is in the front facing of the marketing of the game, and like I thought that she was going to be like this important worldly character, and she might end up still being that, but early on she doesn't quite know like what she is or why she is, and she's actually quite a minor character for the first several bits of the game. The game is very heavily implying that her importance is more than she currently knows, but you spend like the first 4 out of 5 chapters not Lapis is not that important, which was kind of, I think the story works for it, but it was a surprise to me because I thought she was going to be like immediately important as soon as she was introduced, but she really quite isn't. Which kind of surprised me. What were your thoughts on the characters, George?
I really do like Lapis. I thought it's obviously hinted that her importance in the plot is more than meets the eye. But I think that maybe her I think the whole realization about her importance kind of came a bit too fast, because it was kind of like an info dump when everything was kind of revealed. But overall, I really did like Lapis as a character.
I think she plays off the other two.
It's a pretty weird premise off from the get-go, right? Because like at the start of C's story, like you sort of meet Lapis because she's like I think she was in a briefcase, if I remember correctly. Like C just kind of stumbles upon her. Go from there. It's like, what in the world is going on? It's so odd.
And then in like chapter 2 or 3, you go to a specific place to try to unlock her memories, and it explicitly says like, did you remember anything? Not much. And like it doesn't really like reveal a whole lot. Like, oh, I thought I was going to get a big revelation, and I think I feel like I'm right before the final chapter, so I know that I know it's coming, but I thought it was going to happen at a certain point in the story, like it's teed up, and then it just kind of doesn't. Like, oh, okay, maybe I have to wait a little longer. But just those three, Swin and Nadia and Lapis, all have very distinct personalities and play off each other really well. And they're all like they're all young. I think they're like 16, 15, and Lapis is obviously 9-ish if you were to assign her an age. And then like C is like they're like parents.
Babysitter.
It's kind of fun. Like it's like C and it's like trio of children that are following him around. It's kind of fun. Just the dynamic is interesting.
So I know that you've completed the game, George. Like I know, if I remember correctly, at the end of Reverie, there's like one final cutscene that actually shows off the new engine that obviously Falcom has been doing for the Corona Kiseki games, and now they're coming East 10 Nordics. Like, what do you think about like the seeing like the old engine and now like in contrast to the new engine? Like, did you notice that like there's like was the graphical shift like noticeable to you right away? It's like, oh, this looks different when you got to that cutscene.
Are you talking about the very end?
The
Yeah,
very
it's-
end, yeah. It was like in a field of like grass, I think.
I actually didn't notice it right away. I should probably look at it again.
Yeah.
Huh.
That was one of the weird things that like they teased like at when this was coming out in Japan. It's like, oh yeah, we have like a small showcase or sample of the new graphical engine that we're working with in this game, and that's where it occurs at the very end.
I'll be honest. I did watch that like when it was revealed in Japan. So at the time, I had no idea who the character was. But I will say that even on the old engine, Hajimari does some more interesting things with the animations than the other games, but not very frequently. So there's like some scenes where people are animating and like it's in one of the trailers where Noel Seeker like rides her motorcycle into like a burning building to save Lloyd, and it's stuff that I don't think was done very frequently in the other games, where they used a lot more like canned animations and things like that. So they did a little bit more mocap. So even though on the old engine it doesn't compare to the new, they did a few more interesting things with that.
Yeah, the
yeah,
choreography is more dynamic for sure. Like I always think about like the scene that always sticks out in my mind is like the worst of like this engine that they work on. Is like remember that scene near the end of Trails of Cold Steel 4 when like everyone's out fighting the battlefield there, and like it would like just the pan over that battlefield scene was just like so dull and like uninspiring because there's a lot of canned animations of like hits that don't really feel impactful. It was like puppets like kind of ramming into each other almost. Like compared to like with Reverie here, like you have a lot more like there's a lot more craft to like the way cutscenes are presented in this game.
It's no Final Fantasy 16, but it's.
I mean, what is right?
Yeah, the only thing I haven't talked about yet, I guess, is like localization or English voice acting. So I can't, of course, speak to like the translation, but I can just speak to like the performances. I do think that like people, whenever Nice publishes anything, Nice America, people are wondering, is this going to be on the good end or the bad end of the spectrum? Because they're all over the place. They're scattershot. I haven't noticed much of anything in some of the unvoiced dialogues. I've seen a few typos. Like I saw one where they put for when they meant from. So like it read a little bit weird, but all the voice dialogue, I haven't noticed any like stiff translations. All the characters have a very specific manner of speaking. Like Lecter will say like raging hard on, and then they use phrases like that. Altina speaks very formally. Ash will say like things like tight and like drop the consonant at the ends of his words. Like that's how he speaks. So I do think that I don't know how faithful or accurate that is, but in terms of giving the localization, like it's not stiff. It's like the characters feel like even when the lines aren't voiced, you can kind of read them in the character's voice because they are designed in a way that I think feels appropriate. I will say though that less of this game is voice acted than I thought it would be. So you'll have a scene where none of the voice lines are acted. It's all just text. And then when you get to like a very critical line, voices will just immediately jump in for about 3 lines because it really wants to make sure that you get this piece of information down. We'll voice act these 3 lines, and then it goes back to just text again. So it's very kind of sporadic in that way, which I'm like, oh, that's a bit strange.
That's
I think Cold Steel 1 and 2 were like that, but then when XD localized those, they actually added a bunch of voice lines.
I was actually wondering that. Like I remember, I forget which Cold Steel was that. Just 1 and 2, the Xseed games.
I think it was just Xseeds.
Yeah.
So I think
even then, like Chao, like it has, and I've talked about this before. Like in some instances, like the localization is somewhat better than the original Japanese here because there's more flavor and personality. Like Rin in Japanese is a much more plain character than like Rin in English, for example.
He has no personality in the Japanese. Trust. Okay, I was gonna say like, was it the English version actually has more voice dialogue than the Japanese version in Reverie as well. Apparently, people in Reddit has confirmed that they did more voice lines than the Japanese version. So if you find like this is already like jarring in the Japanese version, people say like 1 line and then they don't say the rest. You know, that's a Japanese problem.
Like I said, I know that was the case for Cold Steel 1 and 2, and I know Xseed, they literally advertised, hey, we have more voiced English dialogue than there is Japanese dialogue. I don't think NAS America said anything about that, but maybe they did a similar thing where they just voiced more here and there.
And there was also another thing. They didn't replace some of the voice actresses because they were like they found maybe they were more suitable to certain roles. Like for example, in the English version for Cold Steel 2, Risha makes an appearance in there, and she was voiced by Erica Mendes. But later on, they had her voicing Ellie from Azure and Zero, and because she was more suitable playing that character. So now Risha has a new voice in Reverie. So there's all those kind of like little minor changes too in the English version now.
I know a lot of the voices changed with Cold Steel 4. I don't know if there were additional changes between 4 and Reverie. I'm sure some have, because you can't always get everyone back. Well, at least in English, sometimes it's harder to.
I know the original voice for Millium was Ashley Birch, and they changed it in 3, and I actually think the new voice is better, personally.
I know Laura's voice changed.
I don't even remember,
a few others did.
the new voice actress's name, but
yeah. There was a few cases where I don't know this, but like even Reen sounded a little bit different, but it's still Sean Chiplock. So I don't know if it's just the recording is different. Maybe they did different setups because of COVID. I don't know when these records would have been done. So there's some voices that to me just sounded different, but maybe that's just me not having heard the characters in a while. And then when Fee was talking, Fee's like voice sounds a little bit more airy, like maybe like her setup wasn't quite as good. So this is very minor stuff, but it's just for some reason I'm trying to convince myself, like, does that sound like a different character? Then I look it up, it's like, nope, it's the same voice actor. Maybe the voice actors or actress's voice just shifted a little bit. It's been a while. Who knows?
I was gonna say, like, like when it comes to like voice actor performances, back then, people keep complaining about Trails to Zero and Trails to Azure's Lloyd's Japanese voice and how he sounds way too high pitched in Azure for some reason, when he sounds actually the same to me. I don't know what people were talking about. They said that he sounded way more high pitched than he was than his Zero counterpart.
Huh.
Oh.
But people make these kind of complaints, and I can't freaking tell. It's like he sounds more high pitched. I feel he sounds the same. It's like
they didn't dub, the Crossbell games, right?
No,
right.
they did not.
I think that's a sensible decision. They were just kind of playing catch up, like we can't.
That's why I had to give a lot of credit to his English VA, because he sounds like he has done this role like for who knows how long. Even though he only did.
I know it's the same English voice as Goro from Persona 5, right?
Raymond.
Robbie Damon. Okay.
Yeah. Apparently they have like the same VA in a lot of mediums. Like
you see that occasionally where a certain English voice will end up replacing, like, dubbing a lot of the same Japanese seiyuu roles, because obviously they have like a similar enough register or whatnot.
Because for example, they both voice Prompto, from Final Fantasy 15. Japanese version, same thing. It's like the same Prompto. It just seems that way.
I know Erica Mendez has done a bunch of Megumi Han characters. So
yeah,
things like that.
For Lloyd's Japanese voice, because of course that's all you get in the Crossbell games. I still like how you go. Lloyd's S-Craft that you spam over and over again is Rising Sun, and I'm not gonna emulate it here, but the Japanese voice actor has a pretty signature way of yelling Rising Sun or whatever. And then of course the English voice is different. It's not any worse or better, but it's like, oh, that's not what I'm used to. I'm used to the Japanese voice doing it. Then eventually you upgrade it to something different. So whatever.
I was gonna say the thing that makes me like recognize Lloyd's voice the most in the Japanese version is the one where he has the shock factor. Like when there's a fancier scene, he goes or something like that, where it breaks down.
This Reverie unfortunately has a lot of the same hijinks that are kind of part of the series now in terms of.
I'm trying to remember. Isn't like the game introducing? If you were playing Lloyd's route, I'm trying to remember with the Arch and Cell stage play. Isn't it the game starts with Ilya telling that Risha's size has grown bigger? Is that how the game starts?
That's Ilya's character. It's true to her character in Azure, and Risha's first like 3 scenes all have someone comment on her figure. And I was like rolling my eyes pretty significantly. But however, it does, after that, like the initial couple scenes, it does pull back. I was like expecting to see it once per chapter, but it kind of goes away. So they kind of indulge in it early on, and then it kind of goes away. So thankfully, but that's how Ilya behaved.
Here's me like just like figuratively be like, just wait till Kuro won, Brian.
Oh,
episode
I would say, do they double down? Do they triple down?
I won't say anything else.
Oh, okay.
I'll say Risha appears in Kuro 1. That's all I'm gonna say. And
Yeah. Because Risha's dancing and Ilya comments on her figure. Then she puts on her yin outfit and Wazi comments on her figure, and then you go into an air duct, and of course every single Cold Steel game has that interaction in some place. And just you roll your eyes and move on. Whatever.
All right, guys, I have a PS5 now. It's time to buy a PSVR for Trails into Reverie.
I don't know if that actually works, to be honest, because don't you need to have like a whole complicated setup to make a PSVR 1 work on PS5? It's like even more complicated than PS4.
Oh wait, so I get fucked over by having a PS5?
Oh, yeah. Wow,
I guess
you might be cooked there.
I guess the listeners get pre-warned not to get VR.
Well, I think we kind of covered
big selling point.
So I think we kind of covered our bases for Reverie. We talked about where the game ranks amongst the series. We talked about the gameplay additions. We talked about just how it feels to play with the addition of the Reverie corridor. We kind of talked about the narrative to the extent that we really can in a game that's positioned as this one is. I will say, I'll just repeat that if you're like following the series as it released in English and the last 2 games that you've played are the crossbow duology, it feels actually very natural to go from that to this game. So it really
I guess I'll also say for people who like are interested in any of these games, right? Like I say, don't feel pressured to like skip things if you want to like it's like a marathon. Like take it slow. These games aren't going to go anywhere not to be released in English. It's like if you want to start from the very beginning, there's nothing wrong with just starting from the very beginning. You know, you don't have to feel the like don't feel the rush of like, oh, like to get caught up ASAP, I have to go skip this arc or this game. It's like just take it as it comes and experience it the way you want in your own way. But for me, like if you're determined to play these games like from the start, then do it from the start. Don't be like, I'll skip this arc and this arc. It's kind of like almost reading like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, right? Like it's kind of, just take it at your own pace. They're not going to go anywhere. Just if you want to start a specific game, that's fine. But if you want to start at the very beginning, don't be like, oh, I have to go skip arc 1. You know, just to get caught up ASAP. It's like the whole journey, it feels good when like you're just like when you're learning things as they originally came out in the way that like the devs kind of intended from the start. Because to me that feels more meaningful instead of like skipping like arc 1 and then you go into arc 2 and then they keep making references to arc 1 and you're like it just totally flies over your head. It's like, okay, then what's the point then, right?
Plus, the crossbow games are excellent, so you should play them anyway.
I mean, the Sky games are excellent.
Yeah, and the crossbow and the Cold Steel games, they're good.
Like even the worst Trails game, in my opinion, are still a good 7 out of 10 game. In my
they're still fun video games to play. But narratively, they can kind of collapse and fall on their face. But like, they're still fun games to play.
I know, we love to rag on like certain games for, but you know, it's like it's still decently fun. You know, in like gameplay mechanically wise, it's just like when a game is known for its overarching story and it shits the bed, it kind of like defeats the purpose of what the whole entire franchise is building up upon. That's how I look at it, and that's why I always give it a hard time. But like funness, you know, it's not too bad, really.
All right, George. Give us your final thoughts on coming out of Reverie. Like, what did you like? What do you feel good about, and what weren't you so hot on, and like what do you hope for the future of the series moving forward? As you finish.
Yeah, I thought Reverie was a great send off. They really did not have to do Reverie. Honestly, when you look at the overall story, again, you know, I agree with your point that Lloyd's route is the weakest. But it also has the unfortunate thing of actually being kind of like the overall plot of Reverie, which
it's kind of like the plot, the main plot branches because of what happens in Lloyd's route.
Right. So in my opinion, Reverie, like the story of Reverie, didn't necessarily even have to happen. But I'm glad that it did. Especially, okay, so no spoilers, but I really like how the main antagonist kind of came about. You know, I really like the link it had with the. I'm being really general with this, but I really like how the main antagonist had the link with Cold Steel 4.
Yeah. Like
I thought that was pretty. I think that was pretty creative, and I really like that part of it.
It's one of those things that like it's hard for me to like, because there's something that will like make more sense if you do a specific thing in Cold Steel 4, but even if you say that, it's kind of like revealing its hand a little bit too, right?
Yeah,
Where, like,
yeah.
it's like you understand what I mean, but it's like, how do I convey this without spoiling? It's like by its very nature, you can't do that because of the way it's presented too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And after Reverie, I'm pretty excited for Kiro no Kiseki. If it does get localized, I'm pretty sure it will.
I think it
I
will.
hope that Nisa announces it sometime soon. Yeah, and also
probably worth mentioning real quick. Sorry, that NIS America has kind of already announced Kuro no Kiseki, in that they released a PC version in Japan done by Durante.
MPH.
Yeah,
like, why would
kind
you
of
do
a
that?
soft thing. Yeah. So it's definitely more of a given, and it's just like, hey, they already have the base work for the PC port like already all lined up.
If you don't even count that, I mean, their Falcom's like Twitter basically said, English version incoming later. Basically,
I forgot about that. I think you're right.
That basically seals the deal that's coming.
Like,
Just
no,
gotta wait.
no way.
Now watch it just like be something unexpected, like NAS America did the port, but Clouded Leopard does the translation or something.
Oh my god! Okay, we can't get into that territory.
If
What were you
becomes,
saying, George?
Yeah, I mean, like in any case, I'm still waiting for like an official announcement. I'm pretty sure it'll come sooner rather than later. But yeah, I'm really excited to see how Kuro turns out to be, especially because they switched up the battle system a little bit, and also thank God no more Reen, because I'm just tired of him. I think
Kuro has a really cool battle system. I think people will be surprised. Like it seems weird at first of like combining like action into like turn based and like switching back and forth. Like it sounds weird on paper, but in action it actually works pretty well and pretty fun.
Yeah.
I played like the first chapter of Kuro, and I was so impressed by it. I actually love it. It actually like brought me back to the franchise after being disillusioned with 4 or Cold Steel 4. So that's how I looked at it.
Yeah. So I think Reverie did redeem Reen in my eyes, but I'm glad to have a somewhat new slate going forward with Kuro. And also, I do want to say one thing. I want to plug something in here for a second.
Go for it.
So, all you Trails fans, I noticed a lot of the tweets and comments on my Trails review are like, "Oh my god, IGN finally reviewed a Trails game." Yes, okay. The IGN finally reviewed a Trails game, and that was me. And if you would like to have more Trails game reviewed on IGN, please click the review, watch the video, because that shows my editor, at IGN, that there is interest in the Trails games, right?
Metrics are important. So all the numbers behind the scenes.
Yeah. So, click the article, click the review, click the video, watch it. Make sure it gets as much exposure as it does, because that increases the chance of future Trails reviews. And also, I think the timing of release also factored into it, because late June really didn't have any releases. Like if it released in the beginning of June, when there was like Street Fighter and Diablo and all that shit, there's a chance that IGN wouldn't have taken it, But since the embargo was in late June and the game comes out in early July, as you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, there's like a bit of a lull in July, right? So I think its release date really also played a factor into it. But again, it all comes down to the internal numbers. So if you want to see more reviews for Trails on IGN, especially with like Kuro, if it ever comes out, hell, maybe even Boundless Trails. That's September. September is pretty busy, so I don't know if IGN will take it, but I'll try. But if you do want more Trails reviews on IGN or any of the major outlets, make sure to click it, read it, watching the video to show the editor that there is interest and the numbers back it up.
Yeah, and and like the general spread of reviews for Reverie have been generally been very positive. Like a lot of outlets seem to like it. But yeah, excellent work on the review for
Thank you.
IGN, George. Like very, very cool to see that. But you also did another review, and it was also for our site this time around.
Yeah.
So we have this Master Detective Archives Rain Code. This is kind of the next big game coming out from Tokyo Games, from some of the big creative minds behind both the Danganronpa series, but also from the Zero Escape series as well. Tell us what is this Master Detective Archives Rain Code?
Yeah, so basically it is a it's a mystery adventure game. It takes place in a city called Kanai Ward, which experiences never-ending rain. And basically, the protagonist, his name is Yuma Cocohead, and he goes to Kanai Ward in order to solve what's called the world's greatest mystery, right? And it takes a lot of cues from Danganronpa, as you can tell by its art style. It also borrows a lot of gameplay mechanics. Borrow is a bit of a weird word. It kind of repurposes a lot of the mini games from Danganronpa, like that sword rebuttal thing. That's
so like to back it up, like for people who don't know Danganronpa was sort of like this like mystery sort of like escape game, usually there was like a whole generally the structure of Danganronpa was like someone gets killed, so you find the body, you try to find out who's the killer. So you kind of go around like finding clues around, and then it all convenes into like this trial phase of the game where you kind of talk amongst your peers and discuss who could have done the murder of this, and a lot of like the like sort of like trial mechanics come into play. Like that's kind of the funny thing about the Danganronpa games is outside of like the over top like character personalities coming into it, it's like a lot of like deducing the truth and like who could have a big whodunit situation on on the murders on each like chapter of the game. So like how does Rain Code sort of compare or contrast? Like does Rain Code have a similar structure where there's like a murder that happens at the beginning of each chapter, or is there just like a general like case or mystery?
Yeah. So the structure is very similar. Basically, each chapter there's a murder victim, and Yuma has to investigate the crime scene to kind of figure out what happens. And basically, he always gets caught in like sticky situations. So basically, the big bad of the game is the Amaterasu Corporation, which is a huge corporation, and they basically have a stranglehold on Kanai Ward. And so basically, there's like this big, deep kind of dark secret behind Kanai Ward, and Amaterasu Corporation has some involvement in it. And basically, when Yuma starts, his investigations, again, Amaterasu kind of links back to it, and it's only when it's only when Yuma gets caught in a sticky situation, like Amaterasu's military force kind of points guns at Yuma, right? Yeah, and so basically what ends up happening is that Yuma gets cornered, and he has this ghost companion, and her name is Shinigami. Basically, what she can do is that she can stop time, right? And she can open a portal to what's called the Mystery Labyrinth, which is a physical manifestation of the crime or mystery itself, right? And so then when Yuma and Shinigami go into that separate dimension, time stops. And then in the Mystery Labyrinth, that's where they solve the actual mystery, right? Shinigami takes all the evidence and turns them into what are called solution blades, which is what Yuma puts into his they're called solution keys, right? He puts the solution keys into his solution blade, which is where kind of like that gameplay comes in, right?
So how this is like visually represented in the game is sort of like kind of like Guilty Crown, Tales of Arise type. Like he pulls the blade out of like Shinigami's like, because she has like a
Now,
human form, and like
yeah,
he pulls the blade out of like her body.
yes, yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, so basically, so what Yuma does is he pulls the blade out of her body. Kind of like Tales of Arise.
Yeah.
But it's more fan service,
Okay.
more fan servicey kind of way. But yeah, so basically, when you go into the main gameplay, is that you have like this little mini boss, right? And the mini boss keeps shouting words at you, and like the words come at you, and then depending on what solution key that you use, you have to pick the proper solution key, right? And then hit the correct phrase that contradicts what the boss is saying.
Okay. So like leading up to this mystery labyrinth, I know the way you kind of get around this game is fundamentally different than Danganronpa, because in
Yeah.
Raincoat you have like this 3D overworld that you can like, I don't know how fully explorable it is, like it's a small zone, but I know you
Yeah.
can run around in it, and I'm not sure like during this phase before you enter the mystery labyrinth from Kanai Ward, like are you like
Yeah.
kind of like going around finding clues and evidence like by talking to people first?
Yes, yeah. So basically, the game is like fully animated, fully 3D. You can walk around the different zones in Kanai Ward.
Okay.
Like it's fully traversal. You can walk up steps. You can go stuff like that. And then when you investigate crime scenes, you walk around the room to investigate crime scenes.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
And
Yeah,
and
right,
then
right. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And then
And
when
then
you wait, go on, finish your thought.
yeah. So, but when you go into the mystery labyrinth, it's still 3D, but like the way it goes through the labyrinth is pretty linear.
Okay.
So you kind of just go into like a straight line most of the time as you go through the labyrinth, and then Shinigami will be like, "Oh, here are like three different paths," and then Shinigami will take her scythe and slit Yuma's throat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then like blood pours out, right? And then the
Uh-huh.
blood and then the blood splatter will form a question, right? The question will be like, oh, for example, was the crime scene, was it a murder or a suicide? And then Yuma has to pick which door to go through, like, oh, murder or suicide,
And
right?
then that'll have a correct answer based on like the investigation that you did beforehand. So you should know by that point whether it
Yes.
was okay. Got it.
Yep. Yeah. And then that's where kind of like the mystery labyrinth is kind of linear in the process. You have to pick the correct clues to kind of go through the whole labyrinth.
Yeah. Does it follow that Danganronpa aesthetic in terms like obviously character designs are very
Mhm.
identical, same character designer, but like say when Shinigami slits Yuma's throat, like is the blood pink like in Danganronpa?
Um, so the blood is pink in the game, but for the specific scene that you're talking about, when Shinigami slits Yuma's throat, it turns black and white.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
but the blood is pink, like Danganronpa. Yeah.
All right. Does the when in Danganronpa, a lot of like the personalities were defined where like they were the best at something, right? Like this character was like the best gamer, this character was like the best athlete. Does
Yeah,
this
yeah.
game also have like a similar sort of like trope where like characters in it are like are really good at something that defines their trope or their
Right,
personality?
yeah. Yeah, so it's less about personality, but each of okay, so basically Yuma Yuma's other detectives, his detective posse, they're also part of the World Detective Organization, like he is.
Okay.
Yuma is a trainee, but his other colleagues are full-fledged world detectives, and they each have something called a forte, which is a special power, right? Um, you know, one of them is like this very like confident, very logical, very confident, very smart girl. Her forte is that she can see crime scenes in the past.
Okay.
And but the limitation of her power is that she can only see it from the point of view from the first person who witnessed the crime scene.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so there's like limitation in power, and the way the gameplay is structured, with so each chapter, right? So there's four uh colleagues of Yuma's, right? And so there's four chapters. So as you can kind of guess, each chapter focuses on one of their powers, and the way that the powers are integrated within the investigation is actually is actually pretty creative. So in the first chapter, when you're with the girl, she she's able to see the crime scene in the past, and then you can investigate the crime scene because Yuma's power is coalescence, which means he can share the power with someone else. So he kind of doesn't have a power of his own, but
It's more like a vessel to enable
yeah,
to like more like an enabler.
exactly. So if he holds hands with the person with the forte, he can share the same power, right?
Okay.
So when he holds the girl's hand, then he can use that same time travel power to see the crime scene in the past, right? And then through that mechanic, you can investigate what happens because because in the first case, the previous crimes took place like 3 to 6 months ago. So that's how you piece together the story, right? And then
Mhm.
another character, his character, his name is Desuhiko. His forte is that he can create perfect disguises of other people. Right down to the pitch and their mannerisms. And so the second case is like you have to infiltrate a school, and then the person who gets murdered, all the other students are kind of like accusing each other
Mhm.
of like, oh, who done it, right? And they're also not on the best terms with each other, right? The different suspects, there's kind of like a feud going on, right? And so what Yuma had to do is put on different disguises to talk to the different people because, right? So like,
Oh, that's
if
fine. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so he had to put on different disguises to kind of pry evidence from in
It's sort of like
testimony.
Hitman almost.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So I think the way the fortes are implemented in a game, from a gameplay perspective, are really creative, and I think probably one of the best parts of the game.
Yeah, I mean, you rated it really highly on the site, and even I was like, oh wow, that really like caught me off guard. But
Yeah.
that's really cool to see. Like,
Little I guess background information. I even said to him like, "Are you sure you want to go with the 9? What about an 8?" And he's like, "No, we're doing a 9." Okay.
Yeah.
yeah, tell us a little bit why do you what really made you go for that 9 and really was like, no, this has to be a 9.
Yeah. I think the overall story is really good,
Mhm.
and I really like the character development that Yuma goes through. So basically, it tests his resolve to be a detective, because the thing with the mystery labyrinth, all right, the fallout and the consequences of using that is that whoever is the culprit, it dies at the end.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yuma, every time he solves a case and he figures out who the murderer is, he has blood on his hands, right?
Yeah,
Because
but there's definitely like game over scenarios. Like if you guess the wrong culprit, like I assume there'll be like a game over, and you have to like kind of rewind back to like a save point, right? Or does
um yeah, you get like a game over screen if you fail, and then it kind of takes you back to like the last checkpoint kind of
okay?
thing.
Are there like any like branching or like bad endings or multiple endings
Um,
type scenarios?
there might be one at the very end, but I didn't go back to that part. I'm pretty sure I
Okay.
picked the right ending. But so essentially when Yuma solves the case, he has, the culprit essentially has to die because that is Shinigami's job. Shinigami is the death god, right?
Right.
And at the very beginning of the game, Yuma and Shinigami made a pact in return for Yuma's memories. Shinigami grants him, the ability to use the mystery labyrinth. But so Yuma's also kind of like this amnesiac kind of character. But yeah, so Yuma has to deal with the fallout and the consequences of using the mystery labyrinth, right? And there are cases later on in the game where Yuma actually sympathizes with the culprit, right? He can understand why the culprit decided to murder whoever they did, right? And he questions himself. It's like, should I really be doing this, right? And it's like,
you're pretty much dealing out capital punishment.
Yeah,
I was gonna make a comment like this is just you could have a wider conversation about this if you want.
Yeah. So it's like, well, even if it is the truth, is it, how will it affect others? Is it like, do I want to ignore what's right in front of me just because it's convenient? That kind of thing.
Yeah. That's a pretty interesting like dilemma that like the premise that you put forth and like kind of like all the sort of sort of like the reasoning behind things like that makes for there's definitely potential. And I can see like, oh, okay, like depending on how they stick the landing, and like for you definitely it did, like there could be something over here.
Yeah, I think the game really stuck the landing, and also it's like it's a beautiful game. Like I love the art direction. And my god, the soundtrack is amazing. I love the soundtrack. The only real pain points I had with the game is that it looks a little murky in handheld mode. But that's just a Switch for you.
So it's real Switch exclusive. You don't know if they're gonna port it, eventually or not. We don't know yet. Like they've been pretty adamant saying no, this is only for the Switch. And we have no idea if it'll come anywhere else.
And the load time can be a little long. Yeah, and then there's also like this kind of weird lull in chapter 3 where I talked about how I thought the forte powers were well implemented. The only exception to that is chapter 3 where I felt like it wasn't as integrated well enough. So basically this one girl has the ability to turn back time by like a few minutes, right? Which is an interesting power, but the way they implemented it is just like it's just a bunch of quick time events, right? So like if you fail a quick time event, her name is Fubuki, right? So Fubuki would just turn back time, right? And then
you redo the QTE.
That's just like kind of uncreative.
That's like, fascinating. I think there's I didn't notice like we've seen a lot of this game like in the months prior, and I just didn't know what to think of it. Like I guess what describe the kind of person that like would like be really interested in this game, because like for me I like mystery games, like detective games, like, but I've never played Danganronpa. Everything, like, even though I came into here and I described a lot of Danganronpa, I will admit I have never played a Danganronpa game. This is a lot of like hearsay. I don't really have a strong desire to like play Danganronpa for one reason or another. For me, it's like this seems interesting. Would this game still be for me if I like these sorts of like mystery detective games?
I think you'll like it if you do like mystery detective games, but I also do think that it's an extra treat for fans of Danganronpa because, like, stylistically and mechanically, they're so similar. But I do think that you should give it a try. I mean, like, if you like games, like, AI.
I like AI. I like Ace Attorney. I like Nausea. Like,
yeah. So I think if you like those games, definitely give Raincoat a shot.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because I've been on the fence. It's like, I don't know if I should get it. I don't know if I should. And then like, I didn't know what to think. But it was nice, like being able to like have a sit down, have a conversation with someone that like completed it from front to back. I know that recently they showed off like a DLC schedule for this game, like additional cases. Does the base game like end like feel conclusive, or does it feel like do you feel like it will need that DLC to like make it feel like a complete game?
Yeah, it's a very very complete game. I think everyone has satisfying character arc endings. I feel like the very final scene hints at maybe a possible sequel, but even if there isn't one, I think I still think it kind of comes to like a definitive end. I don't think that DLC is entirely necessary. And I read up on the details of the DLC, and it focuses on it doesn't really focus on Yuma specifically, but more of like his role detective colleagues. Like Tetsuhiko has his own separate story DLC where you play as him instead of Yuma, right?
Oh, okay,
But,
okay.
if you play the game and you get to the Tetsuhiko focus chapter, he's a well well written character, and the DLC only kind of serves to expand that, right?
Okay.
So even without the DLC, I think it's still I definitely do think it's a complete game. It's longer than I thought it was. Actually, it took.
Oh well, like yeah. How long did it take for you?
I'm trying to think. I think at least like some people were okay. So some people on like some reviewers on the internet when they were talking about the game length, they said like 45 hours, which doesn't sound right. I think it's more like 30-ish, maybe.
Like no one will know until like for a week from now when Nintendo will display on your profile how long you've been playing it. Who knows? Like like they have that gameplay timer thing for the Switch, but it only displays like after a week.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was a delay on that.
Yeah, because it'll say like I think if you try to access it in the first week, it's like, oh, you played a lot of it, or like you played it recently or something, but it won't give you a number until like a week.
Huh.
Yeah. Obviously, anyone else, like if you have any questions or comments about the game, like butt in. Like I know I've been trying to.
I was actually gonna butt in right when you said like, hey, like I've never played Danganronpa. Is this a game I should jump into? I had assumed that you had played it, so
like a lot of what it says like very like hearsay, like kind of like fuzzy memories of like seeing people play it, see friends play it, and like I was working off of like very fuzzy like kind of like remembering what Danganronpa was.
Yeah. So
if I did a good job convincing you that I played it, then yay me, I think.
Good job.
I think I played the first game and I kind of dropped it around like halfway through. I just wasn't really into it, I guess, maybe.
Okay.
But we got a lot of like dedicated fan base here. I think the third one even got almost a perfect score on our site, I think.
Okay, well, like a lot of like the reviews of Danganronpa on our site were like when like we were still like a fan site, right? So like a lot of it was kind of very enthusiast writing around that era before like the game like the site became like quote unquote professional. Like Adam, you have more insight on this than I do on explaining it. But yeah, I don't know. Like whenever we talk to Alex about it, he's like he always shakes his head about the Danganronpa reviews.
By the way, I just checked my Switch. The playtime, it says 35 hours or more. So I think you can probably freely safely estimate 35 to 40 hours.
Yeah, that's pretty meaty for sure.
Yeah.
Is that more or less like is that more than the average of a Danganronpa game?
I would probably say so. And here's the thing. I think the reason why I didn't notice time, notice how much time I was spending into it, is because I was really into it.
Yeah, you're just enjoying it. You're just vibing. You're like, I don't care about how long I'm taking this.
Mm-hmm. So 35. So 35. I would say 35 to 40 would be a safe bet.
Cool. And were you playing on English or Japanese voices for this one?
English.
Yeah. And how was that? How are the English performances in it?
Pretty good. I like it. Yeah. So I personally love Shinigami's performance because she had like, okay, so Shinigami has she's like she has the craziness of like Monokuma with like a dash of like the craziness of Junko from Danganronpa.
Okay.
So she's very mischievous. She's very mischievous. She's very sarcastic. Like she's just a very fun. She's a very
She's
fun.
yeah, she's like a very like like kind of like a bubbly character, flirtatious, and like generally just like someone who will liven up the scene, and and that's since that's your sidekick, it seems like any scene can potentially be like fun when like she interjects into it.
Pretty much,
like,
yeah.
Like pretty much breathes life into a scene, which seems well suited for that kind of game.
Yeah, so it's like a very like she contrasts with Yuma, right? So Yuma kind of freaks out at crime scenes. He being kind of inexperienced and a trainee, he's not used to like seeing corpses and dead bodies, right? So like the very first like mystery when Yuma comes across like the victim, right? He understandably gets freaked out, but Shinigami is right there being like, oh my god, a corpse, yes, that kind of thing.
So when you started talking about the character, I wanted to see who the English voice actress was. Not someone I'm familiar with. Anjali Kunapaneni. So she's done, let's see, Karen and Fina Pirate Princess. It's not a lot of things that I've seen. I was going to try to pull like another name, but I just don't have any.
I know I have those sort of like fresh roles that like don't sound like every other character or whatever. It's like
here,
a million times.
Shu Shang and Honkai Star Rail.
There you go. All right, Chow. That is your time.
Does he play Honkai in English voices?
I watch English sometimes. I think the best thing.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I think the best thing they have in English is Asta's voice. I think she has the best voice.
Dory in Genshin Impact. So also for Chow.
Oh no, she's gonna sing her money song all day.
Oh dang!
I don't know.
She is Azaria Frost in Legend of Heroes: Trails of Cold Steel, Northern War. That anime that we all watched to completion.
God, I still need to do that. I don't know.
The first thing I heard about that anime is that quote, it is painfully lower than mid. That was the
wait. This reminds me.
George, were you gonna say something?
Wait, was the anime good?
No.
I heard it was not.
It has been a universally no.
Okay, all right. Well, that sucks.
Well, if you have time, if you want to really do some investigative digging, then feel free. But I watched like 5 or 6 episodes, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to keep on going.
Don't worry, I got someone in my comment section in my Azure guide saying that I need to watch. It's like I need to beat this game for research into the anime.
Oh boy, DK.
But to be positive, it sounds like Anjali did a great job voicing Shinigami.
Yeah, of course.
In main code. So.
Yeah. But obviously, the metrics are super important here on our RPG site. If you want to see more reviews from George about this kind of game, the numbers are really important. You got to click on every screenshot in the review. You got to share it with your friends. Make sure to have comment on it. Like we should make more reviews for our site, George. But this is really cool to see.
I was just saying that George should watch the anime and then pitch a review to Alex.
We're gonna do the anime stream pitch. We're gonna review.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, start reviewing anime on the site. There you go.
George, I'm curious. You talked about how IGN, this is their. I don't know if you implied it was their first time covering anything from the series, or they just infrequently cover the series. Did you have to pitch the review, or how did that come about in terms of getting Hajimari reviewed on IGN?
Yeah, so basically, I had to pitch it.
Okay.
And so basically how IGN works. So my editor, the review editor there, Dan Stapleton, he places a lot of emphasis on like the ROI of reviews, right? Because IGN, like every other site, has limited budget, has limited editors, limited time. So as much as like we would love to cover everything, some things have to fall by the wayside, right? And so I had to pitch the review to IGN for for the game, right? And when I look like when I look at the reviews, I think the last Trails review they did was like Trails in Trails in the Sky all the way back in like 2004, and I don't think they I don't think they reviewed a Trails game since, right? And so the way I pitched it to IGN, I was like, hey, so this game is like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
It was like the end game, the Avengers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like this is kind of like
Okay.
the end game, kind of thing. And I think that's kind of what they
That's
like,
funny.
okay,
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That was a pretty smart analogy for you to get that through.
Yeah. So I'm glad it worked out. And again, if if you want to see more Trails reviews on IGN, you gotta support it. So yeah.
That's just the way of the world, especially for big sites, who are very that's kind of their main stream of like how will they know if people are interested if they're not interacting with it.
I also heard rumors that they were willing to offer $500 to edit their Trails wiki. But that's rumors. But
are you gonna write the Reverie guides for IGN, Shao? Is that what you're saying?
no way. They gotta offer me more money than what other sites offer. I don't think they'll pay a lot.
But yeah, I think behind the scenes, like there's some guide writing for Raincode happening on the site with some staff members. So for people who want some help with the game, I think there's are some guide writers behind the scenes working on that.
And of course, we appreciate any comments or feedback or interaction with our reviews. So do read George Yang's review of Trails Into Reverie over on IGN. I will also write a review. It'll likely just kind of mirror the thoughts that I have stated here. Hopefully that'll be up probably by like Monday or Tuesday. Just got to get through the last chapter.
Once again, thank you so much, George. Like, great review on the Raincode review for our site. Like, thank you for taking the time, energy, and effort to do that.
Right.
So a little behind baseball here, or whatever you want to call it. I told George he'd probably talk about each game for about a half hour, and here we are at like the hour and a half mark into this podcast. So thank you for staying a little longer than I initially slated, George.
Yeah,
no problem.
Yeah, but it depends on you, George. If you want to stay with us for the news section, or if you got to dip out because there are other you have other things to get to. It depends on you.
There's not a lot of news, so maybe it won't take too long.
Yeah, I can stick around for a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, so this news section is pretty quiet, which I'm okay with because we've just come off a marathon of news from everywhere, like I stated. Plus, it sounds like we're gonna get a lot of stuff from Anime Expo, and once we get James back next week, so I'll take a quiet news week. So most of today's news posts are a few sales updates and just some dotting of some indie game release dates. Plus, one major game had a release date shift. We'll go into that. So the only big announcement that I have listed here is that Guild Wars 2 did announce their next upcoming expansion for later in the summer. Guild Wars 2 Secrets of the Obscure will be launching on August 22nd. So this is about a year and a half after their last expansion. They have their developer ArenaNet has moved to the Elder Scrolls Online paradigm where they're going to be doing like a boxed, well, not a boxed, but a titled update roughly yearly. So as someone who plays this game regularly, I don't know what to expect. So the trailer for this expansion was honestly quite terrible. ArenaNet has always been terrible with trailers, but the content that they've put in their little blog posts and their news updates have actually seemed pretty interesting. Mainly in the fact that the one thing that I know that Elder Scrolls Online has done pretty well is that it, unlike Final Fantasy XIV and unlike Guild Wars 2 up to this point, it's not like a linear story where you got to catch up on everything in order to get to expansion 4. You can just start at expansion 4 once you get through the base game. So I think that's really kind of smart to try to get new players in, instead of saying, hey, you got to catch up 300 hours before getting here. You can just say, hey, once you're max level, you can do this. So it'll be interesting to see if this is a shot in the arm for the player base or anything like that. But be playing that in a couple months. Of course, it's coming out in an excellent time because nothing else is coming out in late August or early September.
Are you ready for this expansion though? Like, are you looking forward to it? Are you at a stage of the game where you're like, yes, this is once I'm ready to dive in.
So this So this is Guild Wars 2 has a lot of horizontal progression, not vertical. So you don't have to worry about like being best in slot or being like max level for most things. The thing is for this one, it's the last expansion kind of ended like the large story arc that has been basically the entire game till this point. So this is like introducing kind of like a whole new arc, kind of very similar to Final Fantasy 14, right? Even though I don't play that game, I guess Chad
Yeah,
does.
The
but
current
after
story
like
arc
that,
is over, and
yeah, after the Endwalker, expansion,
they're kind of building up the new one. And they're
like
setting
there's
already.
the patch after Endwalker was like New Journeys or New Beginnings or something like what it was called. I'm trying
Yeah,
to remember.
they're setting up like a new story arc,
Yeah,
and I'm not sure if this story arc is going to be concluded when the next patch comes out, and because I feel like it's like a whole kind of like a side story right now. I know
okay.
some people might think it's a little bit bigger than that, but I feel it's a side story, and the hints to set up the next story has already been laid, but it's not complete.
Yeah, but so
So
Guild Wars 2 is kind of going for like that reset into a new arc with this.
and some background that's quite interesting. So, like 20 years ago, Guild Wars 1, the initial game from like 2007 or whatever. I guess that's not 20 years ago, but close. Um, there was a part in the game where you do a small quest and you would take out a cult. This is like a mid-game quest, nothing too exciting. And in the background, there's this like floating tower. You eventually learn that it's called the Wizard's Tower. It's floating there. You don't know who owns it. You don't know how long it's been there. You don't know what's there. And that answer was never given. You never had an expansion set there. The sequel came out, Guild Wars 2. You never went there. It was always just kind of like this, the world is bigger than the game. Like it was a part of the world building that you would never get to explore. And now here they are in 2023 saying, remember that Wizard's Tower from 2007? How about we go
Of
there?
course you do. Yeah, of course you remember it.
Yeah.
There's no way you forgot.
I should mention though. So I played like a tiny bit of Guild Wars 2, and I just decided I don't have time for it. But so Brian told me like, this new expansion has the Wizard's Tower, and I did not remember the Wizard's Tower. I should mention I played Guild Wars 1. I played pretty much all of it. And then I looked it up in the Guild Wars wiki, and it's like this is the tower shown in the quest called the Villainy of Galrath, and I remember that quest vividly. It's like Brian said, it's a mid-game quest, but it's like honestly one of the harder quests in the game that most people have probably stumbled across if they play Guild Wars because it's not too deep. Most people will have reached that point. So I'm like, oh wow, this is like a follow-up to that quest from 18 years ago or whatever it was. So it's just like I do remember the quest. I didn't specifically remember the tower in the quest.
No,
But
this sounds a lot like Final Fantasy 14.
And,
Because
like,
in Final
it's weird
Fantasy
that they
14,
just
they'll
decided
be
to
like,
focus on it.
oh yeah, do you remember this Crystal Tower quest that you did in the very first version of Final Fantasy 14? Because you need to play this to understand Shellbringers, and most people didn't do the quest, so now they made it mandatory to do it.
So now you got to play Guild Wars 1 to understand.
There you go. Guild Wars 1 is still up, right?
Yeah, it's kind of in maintenance mode, but I don't say that with any like that's a term that's used kind of with negative connotation. Like apparently it's just very financially easy for arena to keep servers up.
It's a
and
veteran of the space, It's
Yeah.
had its time, but but for people who still want to play it.
Yeah, you can play it. It's on Steam, and Guild Wars 2 is on Steam. The main story premise here, for those that care, is that everything in Guild Wars 2 up till last year was all about elder dragons, which is not that unique, but that was what it was.
Which
Now
is why
it's
the last expansion was called End of Dragons.
hooray, yeah. And then this new expansion seems like it's dealing with more demons, and they don't call it hell in this game. The realm is kind of called the mists. So you kind of have like the corporeal realm, and then you have the mists, which is kind of like a nebulous fantasy realm. And it's like demons are coming out of the mists. There's talk about like a sky islands using one of the mounts that you get is a dragon that flies. It's called the Sky Scale. Sounds like that's going to be incorporated into the expansion. So I don't know if it's going to be like you're going into like a sky continent sort of area. So it's one of those things where it's like I'm excited half for what they've talked about the expansion will be about, but also half just because it's a new paradigm. So what's it going to look like? Because it's going to be more bite size, right? But also the idea is that they'll release this year, then they'll update it a few times throughout the winter, and then there'll be another one next year, and then so on and so forth, which is seemingly worked really well for like Elder Scrolls Online. So there's kind of like precedent in the space for it. So I'm eager, I'm excited, and we'll see if they're ending up finding a good balance for, because Guild Wars 2's biggest weakness so far compared to Final Fantasy 14 is that it's just been inconsistent. Final Fantasy 14 is like you get an expansion every 2 years. Guild Wars 2 is like, yeah, you get an expansion when you feel like it every once in a while until now. So hopefully they'll find some regularity and be able to actually, bring that consistency and get the player base up. And that's pretty much it for announcements. Like I kind of looked, and I'm sure there was like maybe some small little update trailers or anything, but I didn't quite see anything else to list outside of some new release dates and some sales updates. So we'll roll right on into those. So here's the big one that people were wondering if it was going to sell well or not due to some rumor mongering from a few weeks back. Final Fantasy 16, of course, just released not too long ago. We had our big initial podcast discussion on that game last week. Final Fantasy 16 has sold over 3 million copies worldwide. And that was there was a lot of scrutiny like, well, how does that compare to 15? How does it compare to 7 Remake? Based on how many consoles, like, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of apples to oranges because, of course, this is PS5 exclusive, of which there's only, like 35 million total sales, whatever.
38 million units sold, if I remember, like the console sold.
And this was over, 6 days versus when Final Fantasy 15 was first reported, it was over 3 days, but that was on multiple consoles. So it's a lot of nebulous comparisons, but
I think 3 million copies will like depending on what the person is comparing it to will be either a positive or a negative.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's a very positive sale for a PS5 exclusive for an install base that's nowhere as much as like 15 started. But
yeah, like I think those are pretty good like numbers like for like the first few days, and see if it has legs. I think that'll be the thing with this game. Like will it continue selling at a consistent rate over a period of like months to a year? And then when this comes to other platforms, like a PC version will be in the works. How much will that like add on to it when that comes out? But I think just in terms of like the scope of like the PS5 install base, like not everyone got a PS5 to play FF16. But I think this is decent like for what it is. It's no like Zelda Tears of the Kingdom 10 million sold like in the first 3 days, obviously, but it's a very different thing.
I was even gonna wait for like next year to get PS5, but since this game is coming out this year, I decided to get it now. Instead of waiting another year, because I keep thinking maybe there's a new mid model upgrade over the years.
I think that's pretty cool. I mean, like I finished the game like last weekend, shortly after we did our last podcast, and it's pretty decent. I was very impressed.
It's a very up and down game for me. It's like the hype is very hype moments, and the low is just really mid, like the character mid. Okay. So if are we doing a final thoughts for this game eventually?
Not right now. We'll do it some other time.
It looks like July is pretty open. So my guess is that we'll wrap back in later in July.
Yeah,
if anything. So
yeah, that'll be a good time. We'll see if we can slot it in, but. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about this game. I do have some thoughts on it, but
I completely agree with everything Colin said in his review. It's a very amazing review. Everyone should give it a read. I think I share the same sentiment as him. And this game isn't trying to be an RPG. It is a pure, awesome action game, and that's what it should try to be.
The other sales update that we had this week is that the Atelier Ryza series, all 3 games, have surpassed 2 million copies. I think the last time we talked about this, was it literally surpassed 1.9 million copies or 1.8?
So
a little bit.
So before Atelier Ryza 3 released, they announced that the first 2 games combined sold 1.6 million. And then around like the financial year, they announced that Ryza 3 sold 300K. So doing the math, it was at 1.9 million. And now we get the 2 million. Okay.
I think today is also the first the premiere of the first episode of the Ryza 1 anime adaptation, I believe. So
I forgot I was getting an anime adaptation.
Well,
and one thing we were predicting that we'd see eventually is the first game hitting 1 million on its own. So I don't think that's happened quite yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see that. But obviously a high water mark for the series. So a success, and we'll go ahead and keep updating it whenever they share the new milestones. Last sales update we got here is that Monster Hunter Rise, which of course just recently got its last extra update, or whatever they called it, the free update, the bonus update, at least on PC and Switch. I believe that's going to come in August for PlayStation and Xbox. Monster Hunter Rise has sold and shipped 13 million copies, and the Sunbreak expansion 6 million. So
that's it. FF16 is cooked. It's over.
It's kind of strange. Like, compared to FF16, that's incredible. Compared to Monster Hunter World, it's like, it's a little less. So like the scales of these is always so crazy. But obviously a big success. And of course, now with that kind of in the bag, the big question is, when is Monster Hunter 6? So built on RE engine and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's gonna be. I can't even imagine what they're planning to do with the next one.
Going into some release dates. So, well, I think I have these in chronological order. An indie RPG, Arcadian Atlas, will release on PC on July 27th. This is the one that has kind of like the very, very Final Fantasy Tactics Advance inspired art style, and at least gameplay perspective. Obviously, I don't know if the progression mechanics work like that, but that's the imagery that it evokes when you watch the trailer. Here is the big one for this month. So a lot of these sales updates are kind of for like indie or smaller releases, but this one, Baldur's Gate 3, was originally slated to release on the last day of August. And I forget if Adam brought it up in a recorded podcast or if it was just in a side conversation, but it was one of those things where Baldur's Gate 3 is purportedly this really big, huge game about a week away from Starfield, which is this endless, huge game. So Larian Studios announced that the PC version of Baldur's Gate 3 is actually being moved up to release on August 3rd, while the console version on PlayStation 5 is being slightly delayed to September 6th.
That is genius. That's a really good move.
I saw some people just kind of describe this as like Baldur's Gate rolled a d20 for evading Starfield or something like that, because they're just trying to get out of the way.
Yeah, hopefully this means like it launches like at a pretty stable. Like hopefully this move up doesn't like make them have to rush faster to get this up and running at a stable rate compared to what it would have been like if it just met it's August 31st. Like hopefully, like it's cool that we're getting it earlier, but hopefully that's not at the cost, like some dire cost to like the game's quality itself.
I have two minds of that. My one mind on the positive end, it's been on an early access for a long while, so I'm hoping that means that they've got all the major issues kind of sussed out, just because it's been playable for years.
Yeah.
But also, so was Divinity Original Sin 2, and I remember when that game first launched, in the very first fort area, there was like this terrible memory leak. I remember I was trying to review that game, and the longer you'd spend in that area, like your VRAM, or it was either your RAM or VRAM usage, would just keep climbing and it would just start chugging. And I didn't really know at the time like what it was. Like, man, this game is terrible. And then like they're early on, I forget if it was pre-release or like a day one patch, or like, oh, oop, we fixed it. So hopefully they'll avoid that. But they've got a lot of that experience under their belt, and it's been in early access for a while. So hopefully it's obviously the fact that they're moving it up nearly a whole month shows a lot of confidence. So that's always good to see.
Yeah, and then they showed like they had some more like infographics about like what are the playable races are all the playable classes, subclasses, what they're adding. Like it seems very, very robust. Like the figure that they were throwing around, it's like yeah, like a normal playthrough is gonna be like around 75 to like 100 hours. That's like holy shit. So it's gonna be a big one.
I do like how candid they are. According to Michael Dowse, who is the director of publishing, he said, "This means that the PC version of Baldur's Gate 3 will be released at a time when you'll have more time to play it." So they're not being like cheeky about why they're moving it forward. They're like, It's kind of crowded back in that September timeframe, so let's just move it up a bit. And the reason why the console one was delayed is because they're really targeting that 60 FPS for PS5.
Yeah, and for the consoles, like it's only PS5 for right now, right? Like that's the only console.
Yeah,
announced exclusively.
I remember about a year ago, people were wondering like, wait, does this mean like you got a publishing deal? It's not coming on Xbox? I'm trying to remember what it was, and it was basically just
Okay. Let me explain. So they never announced this game for Xbox. Technically, they still have not announced this game for Xbox. Not really. Not like formally and officially. You might be wondering, yes, they did. And like, no, they haven't. Basically, they were asked about the Xbox version, like you said, and they basically said, we don't have a console deal, we don't have a marketing deal. We are just still working out an issue getting specifically the co-op to behave well with Xbox, specifically with Xbox Series S, which is the less powerful console. So really, if you want to point finger to blame here, it's that Xbox Series games have to work on both the X and the S version. And right now they're like, we're trying to get it on Xbox, but the S version is causing us headaches.
So it's like we're not announcing it for Xbox, but we're working on it for Xbox, but it's not announced.
Yep. It's sort of like soft announced, like we're working on it, but we cannot announce it yet.
You were mentioning something earlier, George, like of them moving this it's like really, really smart. Like on your end, like what's your how do you see this?
I mean, obviously, I think everyone can, kind of figure this out, but like July and August are kind of slow months in terms of AAA releases. And when September kicks in and like Starfield comes in full force, like not even Starfield, like late August we have Armored Core. Okay, that's when it really. All right, and then from Armored Core on, it's just an onslaught of like AAA releases, big games, and from most people's perspectives, moving up, Baldur's Gate specifically, on PC, is a very smart move because August doesn't really have but the beginning of August, right? There's not really anything, coming out, big coming out during that time, and Starfield is a Microsoft exclusive anyway, so PlayStation people can just play Baldur's Gate instead of Starfield. Like,
I've seen some people making fun, like if you're not a PC player, when September 6th rolls around, you have like sort of a PlayStation exclusive in Baldur's Gate and an Xbox exclusive in Starfield, like head to head.
Yeah,
Kind of.
I mean, like they're both on PC, so it's kind of like, well, but still.
Yeah.
But definitely, like I listed out like September's releases like a few weeks back, and it's tough, man. You obviously Starfield. You have Anonymous Code for visual novel fans. You have Nayuta Boundless Trails for RPG fans. And Liza P looking to be a solid Souls-like game. Mortal Kombat 1 for fighting game fans.
Eternights is coming. I think September as well.
Yeah, Eternights and Payday 3.
And there's also some smaller games that I'm interested in. Like I'm interested in both Sea of Stars and Atlas Fallen, which are both like
Stars.
Yeah, I'm actually
those are both
interested in Sea of Stars.
Those are both August games. So we talk about September being crowded. August is also crowded, especially if you're me and you're one of 10 people playing Guild Wars. So I was like, oh, so I'll finish Reverie, then I'll promise to finish Zelda because I haven't finished that yet.
I like what I played in the Atlas Fallen preview, so I'm actually like really looking forward to Atlas Fallen, seeing how that shapes up too. So in August, like I'm definitely there for Atlas Fallen.
That's almost like the opposite of Baldur's Gate in terms of like they announced the release date when they first showed gameplay for May, and then like 2 weeks later they're like, never mind, we're not ready for May. How about August? So that one I feel like is coming in hot. So
yeah, and then I don't know if you discussed this, a week or two ago on the previous podcast, but Immortals of Avium got delayed from July to like August, like 3 days before Armored Core.
Oh yeah. We didn't discuss that because like we don't know exactly how RPG it is. It's looking like it might be more RPG than it's letting on. So we might actually end up covering it.
I played it. I played it at Summer Games Fest. It's like a Call of Duty or Halo, but with like magic. So
to me, like whenever I see this guy, like I just think of like it's Forspoken but an FPS, and I don't know if that's good or not.
Yeah. I mean, so basically, like for example, that game, Immortals of Avium, supposed to come out, I think July 20th or something. Like it's really close to Pikmin 4. But then they delayed it to a month till like August 22nd, and which I think is 3 days before Armored Core. Like,
Yeah.
They want that extra month for polish, but like at the same time, well, you're kind of screwed because there's Armored Core.
I wonder if there's like a big like audience overlap between like that kind of game and Armored Core too. Like, so maybe they're just hedging bets. Like, I don't know if this is like a big audience overlap with Immortals of Avium versus Armored Core. We'll see.
Right.
Like, but if people were like choosing one or the other, like presented in front of them, it's like I think most people would go like for the big From Software release, regardless or not if they're Armored Core.
I'll be honest, when I think of Immortals of Avium, I'm like, what is that one again? Oh, it's the one with the screen with like the current the currencies and
the inventory, like the Destiny type of like inventory. Yeah.
But I was watching some trailers on Steam as George was just talking about just now, and it does actually look really neat, like a magic focused FPS, like a Hexen.
I think that game, like I feel like it's probably better to play than it is to show. Like, right? Like I think it does, just by its very nature, it feels like it's a game that's probably more fun to actually like get your hands on, more so than like what you're seeing on screen. Because what you're seeing on screen is like the bit rate is like dying, and it's just a lot of movement of like magic spells being flung all over the place. And I don't know if it's a great spectator type of game, but maybe like in practice when you're playing it for yourself, like maybe there's actually something there.
Yeah, I mean, I liked
Mhm.
what I played of it.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm like completely blown away, but I think it's pretty solid in terms of like his gameplay. And okay, here's the thing: when I think of Immortals of Avium, just the name itself, Immortals of Avium, that sounds like if you were to watch a movie and they would just make up a video game.
It sounds like a fake game name.
That's what the name sounds like to me.
You're not wrong.
It doesn't look like that though. Sometimes you have game titles that sound like fake made up, and then you have games that look like fake made up. This one looks really polished. It looks really.
And just on a tech level, it's gonna be one of the earlier like Unreal Engine 5 type of games. See, like that'll be in practice when it comes out. So we'll see. It's gonna be very busy for games very soon again.
Finishing out some of the releases, we have a Switch port coming out on August 11th. This is for RPG Rainbow Skies. Not familiar with this RPG, but it originally came out in 2018. It's on Vita and PlayStation.
I think this is like one of the earlier like PlayStation, was it 3 or 4 indie games like
I bought the first one on PS3.
Yeah, like Rainbow, like I remember Rainbow Skies was like it's like the its claim to fame on PS2 is like, oh, this is like one of the first like indie made RPGs sold digitally on the PlayStation Store, and that was like the novelty of it. I don't know if it was actually ended up being good, but I remember like the name, and it's like, oh, okay, that's an interesting.
I don't remember much about it. I just remember it had a lot of mechanics for like a small indie title, and then I think I dropped the game because it just got really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's why I remembered. But no,
looks like reviews are mixed. Like Metacritic's not gospel, but it looks like it had a few shortcomings. But getting released on Switch for people, to just make it available to modern console and people to form their own opinions.
Yeah.
Wait, what game is this?
Rainbow Skies.
Yeah.
It's like an isometric like fantasy strategy RPG.
Yeah, I pulled up Metacritic. It's 64, and I never want to take that as gospel because I've enjoyed some games in the 60s quite a bit, but clearly wasn't a world beater.
I played a lot of Armored Core games. You know what the average Metacritic scores for those Armored Core games were?
64.
They were lucky if they made it 60.
So that's just because they're too hard and no one's good enough to play them.
That's true.
Touhou New World will launch for PlayStation 4 and 5 on September 12th. It's already slated to launch on Switch and PC in mid-July on the 13th. This is the one that I remember when it was announced. I looked at it. I'm like, this just looks like an East game. As I look at it again, I'm like, yep, kind of looks like an East game. So
I should give it a try. I'll see how it goes.
Our Touhou correspondent.
Look, I have been in certain Touhou games. I have even almost been extra stage and embodiment of the Scarlet Devil. So that tells you that I'm no slouch.
I mean, it doesn't tell me shit because I don't know what the fuck you just said, but I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you if you want it.
That's a raw title though. Embodiment of the Scarlet Devil. Like I'm intimidated by that game. I haven't even seen it. In 2023, we are going to get the first 4 Mercenary Saga Chronicles games. These are games that are very like indie Final Fantasy Tactics like games. A lot of them were initially exclusive to Switch, the first 4. It looks like 5 and 6 did also already release on Steam on PC. So the publisher, the developer Ridion and the publisher Circle Entertainment have announced that the first 4 entries, which are currently Switch exclusive, will make their way to PC by 2023. All I know about
I want someone who's played all these games to tell me if they're good or not.
we had a reviewer cover the first couple Switch games, and they thought they were very average. And the tactics RPG space. If I was going to pick up a tactics RPG that I haven't played yet, I'd pick up Tactics Ogre Reborn. But if you've already played all those, you're interested in trying these out, they're currently on Switch, and before the end of the year, they'll be on Steam. And then the last bit here is something that we kind of talked about a little bit early on, but you put in a slot here, Josh, just to kind of go over what we might expect to see from Anime Expo for next week. We kind of talked about specifically like what publishers were present or had some sort of presence there. But it looks like over at Gamatsu, they've specifically called out the particular titles that are going to be potentially looked at.
Yeah, so like in a little bit after this recording, just like in a few hours, Bandai Namco is going to have their summer showcase. We don't know exactly what to expect. They'll have like it's your anime games, like this new Sword Art Online game. For some reason, they listed One Piece Odyssey in part of like their maybe itinerary. They might get like more content for that. And then we might see some new reveals possibly here. So who knows what they have up in stuff. I assume we're going to see more Sandland as well from there. I mean, that's kind of Animax is kind of like the perfect place to showcase that game again.
Guys, I want Scarlet Nexus 2.
Look, my friend is also coping for Scarlet Nexus 2 as well. I have a friend who's like, please Scarlet Nexus 2. I'm like, you know what? They're probably not going to reveal it there, but I'm with you. I really want Scarlet Nexus.
A Scarlet Nexus follow-up with a bigger budget would be pretty surprisingly good, I think.
We're with you, George.
Hell yeah.
Scarlet Nexus OST, still think about it here and there.
Does anyone remember that Capcom game that they showed recently that looks like a samurai game?
Yeah, the Path to the Goddess, or was it Kuni something?
Yeah.
I was like watching my friend playing Onimusha, and I was like thinking, Capcom made Onimusha with Sekiro mechanics.
I'll be honest.
Sorry.
When Chow said Capcom Samurai game, I didn't know what he was talking about. So I Google Capcom Samurai game, and the first result is Onimusha. Right when Chow started talking about Onimusha.
When they first showed like the reveal trailer for that, just like as a tangent, like a lot of my friends were like, "Is this a new Onimusha game?" Like just the first few seconds without like not knowing, what the title was or anything. Like, because man, it's still weird. They like put out like a remaster of the first Onimusha game, then never put up another Onimusha game again.
I think the problem with that remaster is they don't use the original soundtrack, but you don't want to use the original soundtrack because it'll be like a copyright nightmare because of that scam artist.
Oh yeah, that's right. Other game deals we'll see at Anime Expo. Well, they'll have a panel for Disgaea 7. The games.
My friend lined up an hour to play Relink, Granblue Relink over there.
Yeah, they have a demo.
It completed the demo. It was very fast. It took her no time at all to complete the demo.
So people there are there confirming it's a real video game and moving on with their lives. Like, okay, well, we'll play it when it comes out.
The line to get there is worse.
I imagine. I don't know. I do not like going to Anime Expo with a normal badge. I always go there with a press badge.
Better wear a mask when you go there. Apparently, there's too much odor. It's almost like going to a smash convention.
You want to like triple mask when you get there. At this point, So and then Atlas and Sega are gonna have like a concert for the Shin Megami Tensei series to celebrate its 30th anniversary. Supposedly there will be no new announcements.
But they're literally the press release said there's no announcements, but maybe they're lying.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. Let's see what else we have. Obviously it's Atlas and Sega. They have separate panels for Persona 5 Tactica and Persona 3 Reload, so we might get new info from them about it. Sega is also hosting a panel for the Yakuza Like a Dragon series. So they might show off some new footage for upcoming titles for that, whether it's the Man with No Name spin-off game or the Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. I can't imagine it'll be too much new info on that, but we'll see. Obviously, like we said, Granblue Fantasy, they're showing off Relink with a demo. They also have Versus Rising there, which is the next new Granblue versus fighting game, like kind of like a sequel, a follow up. There's also a panel for Fate Grand Order to celebrate its 6th anniversary, the global version. Supposedly, like last year, they're gonna have shared new news on upcoming Type Moon projects. Who knows what it is at this point? Like the surprise last year was they were localizing the Mahosakai.
Which on the Hollow Knight?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the English name. And so this year, obviously, Fate Samurai Remnant is coming out in September. We still have no new news or like no recent news on the Fate Extra remake, so maybe we'll hear new news on that. I can't think of what other Type Moon projects, unless
I
they
don't think they
decide.
would share Japanese news, would they? Like, it's mostly English stuff. Because it's like, what are the odds that they would announce Tsukihime, the red part? I forgot what it's called.
I mean, in order to announce that, they have to announce an official localization of the first one first, right?
True.
Because we're all working with the fan translation that recently wrapped up. But in order to announce part 2 first, they would have to announce part 1 first for official localization. So maybe they'll do that. That'd be great. But we'll see. That'd be a very big surprise as well. Also be kind of ironic because the fan translation has recently wrapped up as well. But obviously,
but that happens a lot in the localization scene.
Yeah.
It's like we just wrapped up, and now they're like, "Oh, there's an official version coming." It's like,
but obviously, it'd be very good to have an official release up over just a fan translation, right?
Yeah.
Like, show your support, and then like being able to just play that on official devices in an official way.
I would always support the English version. Stuff like this would happen, so that it's the only way you get to see sequels coming. If you don't buy it, then there's no sequels.
Exactly. There'll be a Spike Chunsoft panel. They're going to show off more probably on the development and maybe future content for Raincode, as we discussed earlier, along with the next science adventure title, Anonymous Code, which recently released in Japan a few months ago, and then the English localization is coming in September. And I think that's about it for like significant video game stuff happening. Obviously, there's going to be a CyberConnect 2 panel as well. They'll be discussing Fuga 2, which recently released, and who knows if they're gonna show off any new projects that's cooking over at CyberConnect 2.
Should ask the random staff, have you played the OG FF7 remake? OG FF7 remake.
Dude, I still want to know what OG FF7 remake under CyberConnect 2 look like. I need it so bad. Oh,
like, is it so bad that they had to take it to their hands, or it just wasn't meeting their standards?
I'll do anything to see that. Just see that running and play it for myself. Even oh god, hopefully like in a decade somehow someone will like get that build somewhere, steal that build, and just distribute it.
Prototype leaked to the public like Resident Evil 1.5.
But yeah, I think that's it for what we can expect for Anime Expo. So hopefully there'll be some big cool surprises to talk about next week.
Yeah, and that kind of covers us for an abbreviated news section here. But yeah, we'll have a lot to talk about next week, the Anime Expo, maybe with some surprises with a Scarlet Nexus 2, but you didn't hear it from us first. So you can find RPG Site on all the social media networks, channels. You can go search for RPG Site on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram, assuming Twitter's still around in a week. Who knows at this point?
Yeah. Hey, you know what? just in case, just in case Twitter's still up by the time this episode comes out, you should let us know where we can find you on the internet, George.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Yin Yang Fui. So
yeah.
Well, maybe so. It's YINYangFooey. I'm on Twitter at that handle. That's also my Blue Sky handle. Which
you're one of the privileged.
Yeah. I am part of the privileged. Yes, I am the upper class of Twitter users.
Send me an invite when you have one, man. Keep it on the
I haven't posted anything on Blue Sky yet, though. But yeah, I mean, if Twitter goes to shit, I guess I'm going there.
Mood. But yeah, and go ahead and of course go to IGN, go to the IGN video review for Trails and Reverie that George put up, and give it a thumbs up, give it a comment if you got it, and then go to his review of Raincode over at RPG Site and put a comment there if you like as well. And then of course, once we have our own Reverie review, go ahead and like it or dislike it as you please. Once that's up on the site, we'll tweet it out.
They're gonna be like, this was better than the Cold Steel 4 review. More about thumbs up.
Yeah. And then of course,
reviewed it.
Oh, yeah, he did do the impressions piece, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and he was very positive about it.
and then, of course, if you've listened to this podcast all the way through, we do like to see any feedback that I know at this point when we're signing off, I'm sure a lot of people have already clicked off, but if you're still listening, please go ahead and give us a comment. We love reading those. If you haven't, join our Discord by hitting the link at the top of the rpgsite.net homepage or going to discord.gg/RPG site. And we will be back next week with another episode of the Tetracast, talking about anything and everything that comes out of Anime Expo. We'll catch back up with James. Until you hear from us next time, stay safe and take care, and we'll talk to you all later.
Thanks for joining us, George. We appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you
George.
so much for having me.